Bonjour à tous, bonjour chère Marie, bonjour chère Alice. Je suis très heureux d'être parmi vous. On m'avait préparé un discours, mais j'ai décidé de ne pas le lire parce que je suis atrocement mauvais quand j'ai les yeux rivés sur un discours. Je suis aussi très mauvais en impro, mais au moins je n'ai pas l'impression d'être ennuyeux. Je vais vous dire vraiment quelques mots. D'abord, mon très grand plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Et en venant, en montant les escaliers vers l'amphi Chapsal, je me disais quel bonheur c'était d'être directeur de Sciences Po, puisque hier soir, nous avions le plaisir de recevoir une journée de débat du GIEC, qui avait décidé de venir à Sciences Po pour faire sa réunion annuelle, et même moins qu'annuelle, je crois que c'est une fois toutes les quelques années, pour débattre des questions du climat. Et évidemment, on a beaucoup parlé de changement climatique et de la prochaine école qui sera créée à Sciences Po, qui est l'école du climat. Et puis ce matin, j'ai le bonheur de venir parler de journalisme et de nouvelles pratiques. Alors je ne vais pas parler de journalisme et des nouvelles pratiques parce qu'en fait vous allez le faire infiniment mieux que moi, mais je vais vous dire pourquoi tout ça me semble très naturel à Sciences Po. Au fond, quel est notre core business dans une institution universitaire ? C'est d'abord et avant tout la liberté académique, mais en fait la liberté de recherche. Et cette liberté de recherche, elle se décline dans un certain nombre de domaines. Il y a la liberté académique, évidemment, la liberté de poser des faits de manière scientifique, d'aller les explorer, de construire de nouvelles théories de manière libre. Et puis, il y a évidemment la liberté d'informer, la liberté journalistique, qui est aussi un des fondements, une des infrastructures critiques de nos démocraties. Et je pense qu'il est normal, disons, et souhaitable pour une université de sciences sociales d'avoir une école de journalisme, bien sûr, et puis d'en avoir une qui, par ailleurs, est parmi les meilleures au monde, ce dont, évidemment, nous sommes extrêmement fiers. Et donc, je crois qu'il y a un lien entre cette manière de voir les choses, entre liberté d'informer, liberté académique, liberté aussi dans la création, même si c'est un peu moins ce qu'on fait ici à Sciences Po, la création artistique, je veux dire. Et puis, évidemment, la liberté d'expression. Et c'est tout ça qui nous donne un socle commun, qui nous permet de débattre finalement de manière ou de challenger nos opinions, de débattre, et en fait qui constitue une des conditions de la démocratie. Mais ce que vous allez faire, c'est, je pense, explorer, si j'ai bien compris, les choses un peu au-delà. Ça, on sait que la liberté est un fondement de la démocratie, mais ce que je pense on doit aussi toucher du doigt, c'est que la liberté, bien sûr, est sur le recul au niveau mondial, et que donc on a besoin d'endroits comme Sciences Po pour être le cadre, disons, de l'expression sereine et apaisée de cette liberté. Mais la liberté, c'est aussi très difficile. C'est une exigence, et c'est la raison pour laquelle, vous savez, peut-être, même si c'est parfois difficile, j'aime beaucoup articuler la notion de liberté et la notion d'excellence, qui n'est pas que scolaire ou académique, mais qui est aussi un impératif éthique. Et de la même manière que les chercheurs bénéficient de la liberté académique dans un cadre, je cite de manière un peu administrative le Code de l'éducation, de rigueur et d'objectivité, de la même manière s'appliquent à la liberté d'informer des normes journalistiques, éthiques, d'objectivité, de processuelles, disons, qui font qu'on peut avoir confiance dans la liberté et dans ce qu'elle produit sur le fond. Et donc, je crois que c'est cet équilibre assez subtil, assez compliqué. Si les choses étaient simples, on n'aurait pas besoin de les étudier pendant plusieurs années ici à Sciences Po ou ailleurs, mais c'est cet équilibre qu'il faut, je crois, essayer de construire. Et franchement, si on n'arrive pas à le construire dans un endroit comme Sciences Po, je pense qu'il est en fait impossible de le construire nulle part ailleurs. Et donc je compte sur vous et sur cette journée d'études pour y parvenir. Alors évidemment, vous allez aussi parler de défis générationnels, ce n'est pas moi de tous les citer, mais on voit bien qu'on est dans une période de rupture extrêmement forte. Je ne vais pas revenir sur l'ensemble des éléments qui la caractérisent. Rupture évidemment technologique avec l'intelligence artificielle, rupture de la conflictualité internationale, rupture du changement climatique, qui vont nous percuter. Et puis on peut évidemment s'intéresser à ce que ça change. Il faut, et ça va changer massivement les choses, y compris, je crois, dans la pratique journalistique ou dans la manière, disons, d'exercer les métiers. Et je pense que vous avez la chance d'avoir une école de journalisme qui est extrêmement attentive à ces évolutions, et sans doute peut-être la plus attentive en France à ces évolutions techniques. Mais en même temps, il y a aussi des invariants. Il y a des invariants qui sont les grands principes que j'ai cités, et ça s'applique un peu à tout. Et c'est pourquoi je crois beaucoup à l'apport des sciences sociales et de la science, en fait, pour regarder ces sujets. l'humanité a déjà traversé des moments de rupture absolument phénoménaux. L'autre jour, c'est l'avantage d'être un petit peu âgé maintenant, j'ai vu des amis de lycée, et j'ai eu mon bac en 97. On se rendait compte que la moitié d'entre nous n'avait pas un travail qui existait. Alors le mien existait déjà en 97, mais la moitié d'entre eux n'avaient pas un travail qui existait en 97. Marketing digital, cybersécurité, optimisation informatique. Enfin, d'ailleurs, tous les secteurs du digital n'existaient pas vraiment. En fait, Internet débutait à peine. Donc je ne dis pas que les ruptures actuelles sont du même ordre, parce que franchement, elles vont être plus fortes. Mais si je prends un peu de recul historique et vous m'autorisez un peu de cuistrerie, je dirais quand même que l'ouverture des routes transatlantiques, par exemple, c'était une rupture assez phénoménale pour l'humanité. Et donc, ne nous disons pas que c'est totalement sans précédent. Mais pour arriver à se dire que ce n'est pas sans précédent, on a besoin de la science, on a besoin de l'histoire, on a besoin de la sociologie, de la théorie politique, de la science politique, pour aller regarder, au fond, ce que sont les invariants et ce que sont les endroits qui vont être révolutionnés. Et je pense qu'une des grandes chances qu'on a ici à Sciences Po, c'est ce dialogue entre la pratique professionnelle, et donc voir ce qui change là tout de suite, et puis notre capacité à prendre du recul et essayer de nous inscrire dans un temps plus long. Et donc je crois que le défi générationnel, ce sera d'être capable d'aborder ces ruptures, mais aussi de comprendre ce qui ne va pas changer et qui sont au fond les grands principes humains d'aspiration à la liberté, à la vérité, et au fond une sorte de concorde dans la manière dont on vit nos existences sur ce petit bout d'univers qui est le nôtre. Voilà ce que je voulais vous dire, en vous souhaitant une très belle journée d'études et puis en m'excusant de ne pas avoir suivi le texte de mon discours.
Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Pour débuter cette première journée, nous avons l'honneur d'inviter Jessica Pressler à monter sur la scène. Jessica, if you want to come on stage and please have a seat. Un Tugdual Roche, l'un de nos étudiants de l'École de journalisme de Sciences Po, qui va présenter le profil de Jessica avant qu'elle nous donne sa présentation. Merci.
Hello. I'm looking at my notes on my phone. I'm sorry about that. Oh, okay.
So Jessica Pressler, you are a long-form and magazine journalist as well as a producer. You're known for your work exploring the crossroad of money and culture. Your reporting has appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, GQ, Elle, and New York Magazine, where you spent more than a decade as a staff writer. In 2015, your story, The Hustlers at Scores, was nominated for the National Magazine Award and later inspired the film Hustlers. And then a few years later, your 2018 feature, How Anna Delvey Tricked New York Party People, became the basis for a Netflix series, Inventing Anna, created by Shonda Rhimes, a project on which you also served as a producer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm very happy and honored to be here, especially among many distinguished colleagues. Is that too bright? So I was invited here today to speak to you about some of the challenges that, a little too close, that we face in journalism to do with facts and discerning truth from fiction and how that can be difficult. And to do that, I kind of want to start by talking a little bit about my background and how I became a person that people ask to speak about truth and fiction and liars and things like that. So we're going to do a brief history lesson here. I'm just going to tell you about my background. I arrived in New York City in 2007, which was a very interesting time for the city. In general, Wall Street was booming. There was, there's a lot of money in the city at this time. And New York Magazine had hired me to write kind of every day about the kind of culture of wealth and money that existed in the city at that time. Just to give you a sense of what was happening back then. So I was writing about that every day, and then fast forward kind of to 6 to 8 months, after I started the job. The financial 2008 happens, and the banks, it turned out, had been engaged in all this fraudulent activity. It caused this crash, and suddenly I wasn't writing about the second Gilded Age, as people called it. I was writing about the Great Recession. And this was a really interesting time as well, because what happened after the crash is that there was this it revealed this kind of wave of fraud that happened. Warren Buffett, who's this American investor who you may have heard of, he's very folksy, he has a lot of sayings. This is one of his famous quotes: when the tide goes out, that's when you discover who's been swimming naked. And in 2008, post-2008, it was, there were a lot of people that were revealed to have been swimming naked. Here we go, Bernie Madoff, he's kind of one of the most famous ones. He ran a $65 million Ponzi scheme. Raphael Follieri, he was one of my favorites. He was an Italian investor who claimed to have ties with the Vatican and was selling real estate, but he had no ties with the Vatican. He just took millions of dollars from people. He was dating Anne Hathaway. He lived in the Trump Tower. I think at one point I did a story about the Trump Tower because it was like startling how many people lived there who had been convicted of securities fraud, which looking back, you're like, oh. Ken Starr, he was an accountant to the stars, if you can believe that such a thing existed. These are all people who kind of went to jail during that time. And, this is Ken Starr's wife, who is somebody that I wrote about as well. This is the mood of the crash. And so it turns out that New York really has this rich history of con artists and fraudsters, and this was sort of very startling to me and evident because all of these kind of venerated institutions that when I had arrived in the city, had appeared to be upstanding, and all these people who had appeared to have all of this money, who were donating to museums and getting out of their town cars and just being amazing, all turned out to be kind of not legitimate. Like into my eyes, a very short time. It was like, oh, that turned out to just be a lie. And that was kind of formative to me going forward. There's this Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Viktor Frankl. He is like one of the early New York City con men, and he sold the Eiffel Tower to people twice, despite not actually having possession of the Eiffel Tower. So this is like a classic New York City con man situation that, these stories are kind of endemic to New York City. And kind of going forward, they started to be the kind of stories that I wrote about because we had a lot of them. All right, so now we're after the crash. Let me see. I sort of realized that New York was like the epicenter of this, and that the flip side of being a destination for people who want to make it is that you get all these people who are so desperate to make money, they'll do anything, including lie and cheat and steal. And I realize I'm kind of in this city full of liars and hustlers. And one of the stories that I wrote about kind of in that period also was the hustlers at Scores. It was a group of, do you say strippers here? I don't know. Exotic dancers who would get men drunk and steal their credit card numbers. And that was kind of a Wall Street story as well, because when Wall Street tanked, their business also suffered. They were kind of literally swimming naked. But then as time went on, this is the Hustlers movie, so yeah. As time went on, the economy recovered, and there was a new boom, which was kind of the startup boom in the early 2010s. Again, there was like a lot of money, and there was a whole new bubble, and then with that came this whole new class of kind of fraudulent, fake it till you make it kind of entrepreneurs. And that's when we come to Anna Delvey, who I think probably most people have heard of at this point, the fake German heiress who tried to buy a building on Park Avenue for $50 million to house her non-existent arts foundation. And that story came out at the same time as Elizabeth Holmes, who ran the blood testing startup Theranos, that was also found out to be fraudulent. And I don't know if you guys had the Fire Festival story here. It was a music festival that was a disaster. And it's Billy McFarlane, who coincidentally lived with Anna Delvey at some point. It's a small world. They were all kind of similar stories in that they were this kind of calamitous, really kind of ultimately silly frauds where no one was hurt, although they could have been hurt. And the people who were mainly affected were wealthy investors. So it was a little bit of like a funny fraud. And it was also signified to me at like the popping of another bubble. In this case, it was kind of the private investor venture capital bubble that was behind all of these businesses that kind of ended like all of the money that these people were getting. And so the point that I'm trying to make really by bringing all of this history up is that this is like a very cyclical thing. Let me just, sorry. Yeah, there is this cycle. It's like Warren Buffett pointed out. Wherever there's a lot of money or the appearance of a lot of money, or in an industry like banking or crypto or AI, you can always find a lot of fraudulent activity, and that's a true thing. That will always be true. And in terms of the challenges kind of facing journalists, I mean, I think that we always have to deal with people who are lying. We always have to deal with frauds. They exist. They're endemic to the society. I'm really interested to see what other people have to say about kind of the tangible ways, the new ways that fraud is being done, and there are real things happening with AI and faking evidence and things like that. That's all stuff that we have to look out for. What I kind of think is a greater challenge at this point is that there's Anna Delvey. A greater challenge at this point that I think is the way that these narratives are treated. I mean, it's been very disturbing to me to see Anna Delvey kind of, here she is with George Santos, who is a congressman that was elected to New York, even though he had a fake resume. We've kind of elevated these people, and that's very disturbing, and I definitely have had, I guess, a part in that in some ways, inadvertently. People think that these people are kind of admirable, and they kind of weirdly are in a way, because who has the audacity to stay in a hotel for a really long time and not pay for anything? Or the women in Hustlers were empathetic to me because they were kind of working against a system that wouldn't have them. And that's also true of Anna Delvey. There are these kind of admirable things. But it's kind of disturbing how that has really overwhelmed the narrative and how these people have been elevated to like an extreme extent. I think one of the challenges that journalists have to face is sort of writing that narrative. Like in America, some of us say we'd like politics to become boring again. And I kind of think that crime should become bad again. Like crime is stupid and ugly, and it shouldn't be glamorous. And so I think that is a really interesting challenge, to kind of write about these things in a way that makes that clear, but is still engaging to people and entertaining. So yeah, that's my hope, is that you guys will go forth into the world and find kind of ways to write the narrative, basically, to break through the noise and kind of be like, hey, wait a minute, this isn't cool. Yeah. So that's my hope. That's all.
Thank you. Jingle. Thank you, Jessica. I interrupted the jingle. Thank you. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I want to jump into this just kind of little brick by little brick. So you describe this world of, fraudsters who are kind of glamorous, a little bit, sparkly or flashy. There's entertainment there that kind of sips into the narrative, whether we like it or not. How do you go about sourcing in that world? As if we go back to, how you report about some of these stories step by step. Step one, how do you build your sourcing? Is there a kind of specificity to building sourcing within that kind of environment?
Yeah, I think it's like any journalistic endeavor. I always think about, I don't know, do you have that children's story like about stone soup? Where it's like somebody needs to make soup, but all they have is a stone, so they go and borrow a carrot from someone, and then they go and borrow a piece of celery, and they go and borrow chicken, and eventually they have a soup. I kind of feel like that's what reporting is. You're getting a little bit over here, and a little bit over here, and a little bit over here, and you put it together, and eventually it starts to coalesce and make sense. People are not very forthcoming. It depends on what world we're talking about. The world of strippers is a different world than Wall Street. Sort of. And so they're different people, but kind of different accounts, different, pulling different kinds of paperwork, doing that kind of stone soup version of reporting, and checking everything against each other and things like that.
Are there types of bias that maybe pop up when you're doing that kind of reporting, or things that you think our students and junior reporters should be conscious of when they are looking to report about these kinds of really bubbly worlds? How do we check ourselves?
Oh yeah, definitely. The title of this talk, I don't know if I said that is everyone is lying to. Everyone is lying to all of the time, and people will absolutely. So you have to kind of be very skeptical of almost anything that anyone is saying. The other thing that, especially in like the economic and business worlds, is that people will really try to make you feel stupid. They'll make you feel like if you don't understand something, it's not because it doesn't make sense. It's because it's like your fault. But in fact, very often, things don't make sense because they don't make sense and they shouldn't exist. The other thing is, my main advice to journalism students is always, if someone says to you on the phone, this is not a story, like go do something better with your life, then it is absolutely a story. Like that is the ultimate sign that you are on the right track. So yeah, I think that, people don't want to talk to you if you're doing a story that is good.
So that's a good sign. If people hang up in your face, you should take
People
that as encouragement.
Yes, that is encouraging, yeah.
I agree with that. Do you think that separating fact from fiction is perhaps one of the biggest opportunities for young journalists today who want to make a name for themselves? You talked earlier, about how everyone's lying, how fraud is this kind of cyclical thing that keeps coming back to the front stage. Do you think that that's something that young journalists should invest time in and really think about how to make a difference in uncovering fact from fiction to make a name for themselves?
Definitely. I think that definitely parsing, yes, the kind of, I guess like there can be these narratives that overtake situations, and there's always kind of something more behind them. There's always more to look at, and there's always more nuance in a lot of situations. So yeah, definitely, figuring out ways to tell the truth in a way that is clear and, not entertaining, but like understandable and appealing is major at this point. Nobody really, unfortunately, people have just become so a nerd to bad news. Nobody really wants to read a bunch of dry facts. I do think that you have to tell a story in the best way that you can. So that is, I think, a really useful. I think storytelling is more important than ever in a way to kind of figure out how to share these facts in a way that engages people.
And how do you draw the line, between storytelling and what becomes, and storytelling as a part of journalism, and what could become then entertainment? I mean, I discovered your work, I have to admit, like a lot of people, through your fictional character, as portrayed in a Netflix series, which is, but then of course looked into what you were doing as a journalist, and it does seem like more and more the line between, just journalism and entertainment is becoming a little bit harder to grasp, especially with social media format, etc. How do you draw the line? When do you know you've gone too far, and when do you know that you're still standing your ground as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of people who refer to Inventing Anna as a documentary is incredibly disturbing to me. It's not. It's a fictionalized portrait of events. That's a really, there is a line, right? I mean, I do journalism, and the TV show is a TV show that has factual elements. It's really tricky to talk about this because I do feel like as a long-form magazine journalist, the storytelling is such a bigger part of it than somebody who's doing kind of hard news day to day. It sounds different and it looks different. I mean, it's important, I think, at the end of the day, that the basic tenets are there, that it's factual, that what I'm writing is nonfiction, and clearly marked as such. But it's not really a line for me to draw, if that makes sense. I think that people need to understand what a documentary is and what a TV show is. There's not much I can do about that, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, people need to get educated as well about what it all means. I want to go to the room, give people a chance to ask questions as well. If someone in the audience has a question for Jessica Pressler, if you can raise your hand, and we'll try to get a mic to you. Any raised hands?
No questions.
No raised hands. If not, I have further questions. Oh yeah, we have a raised hand there.
Hello, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. I was wondering, until you have a great discovery in your research, do your colleagues, or have you ever experienced that people do not take you seriously as in your journalistic work, and degrading it as gossip, while there is actually some very big value behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like not being taken seriously is a big part of being a journalist, and it is discouraging and uncomfortable. I mean, so much of journalism for me is awkwardness too, is just going into situations where you feel very awkward and kind of pushing past that awkwardness, pushing past those people that kind of make you feel like you're dumb for asking questions. It's so that is the thing, and it's very hard to live with that kind of discomfort of not feeling always like you know what you're doing. I think part of the whole thing is that you don't know, and you're trying to find out. That's the job. Is you don't actually know. You're trying to understand, and existing in that space can be very uncomfortable. And I think that people don't really talk about that enough. And journalists especially, I think they like to act like they know what they're doing all the time, but they don't. And that's kind of the whole thing. That's really the job, is that you are getting the information. So you are coming from a place of a little bit of ignorance, and that's okay. So yeah, that's my pep talk. That's my motivational speech for today.
Thank you, Francie, for your question. Any other questions in the room? Yeah, we've got two. Whoever gets a mic first gets to ask the last question. Sorry.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. You said that fraud and crime shouldn't be glamorous, but obviously they are. If I can ask you a bit of a predictive question, you outlined this kind of timeline of waves of high-profile fraud. What do you think is the next big thing for fraud? Can you give us an anecdote of something you recently worked on? And is reporting on it more difficult or easier than it was back in the day?
Well, it's definitely AI right now, right? I mean, there's AI companies that, what does it even mean? What does powered by AI even mean? There's so much fraud in that world. For me, I've kind of stopped writing. This was not the only thing I wrote about ever. This just happens to be the best known stuff. But I've almost stopped writing about these kinds of stories because it is so the same to me. It's like the same play with different actors. Like every one of these waves, it's like the crypto thing. Oh, it's like this kind of I've seen this exact thing before, and so it's very like kind of. It's almost boring after a while, like for me, and so I guess that's like kind of weirdly comforting in a way that there is this like human tendency to like just do the same thing over and over again, even if it's a different industry. So it's like, yeah, there will always be liars. They will always find a way, and they will always get caught because they're not that smart. Like they're actually not like, I mean, the huge kind of weird misconceptions is like, oh my God, these people are masterminds. This person, she's still there, she's not there. But Anna Delvey, not a mastermind. She got caught like really fast, right away, went to jail. I mean, these people are not masterminds. Like they got, you know about them because they got caught and they're bad at their fraud. So yeah, so it's not glamorous. And that's kind of what I was saying is that I think that, I remember, you guys probably aren't familiar with Liar's Poker. Michael Lewis, he wrote this book in the 90s about Wall Street. And he meant it to be sort of an indictment of the culture of Wall Street. And instead, it became like a playbook for people who wanted to work on Wall Street. And it became like, and he was horrified. So I do think that the challenge is writing about these things in a way that doesn't glamorize it. And I don't really know how you do that, because we are writing this now. When I wrote about Anna Delvey, I was like, this is insane. And people are like, wow, that's so cool. And it doesn't generally track for me. So there is like an opportunity there to, you know, kind of, I said, like write this narrative about like how we're thinking about these things, because it is all wrong in a way.
Jessica, thank you so much, Jessica Pressler, for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bienvenue à Pavla Holcova. Welcome on stage. And Marius Loiseau for the profile. Thank you.
So, good morning, Pavla Holcova. You are an investigative journalist based in Prague. You joined the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project in 2013, where you are now regional editor for Central Europe. You are also the founder of Investigation, an independent media outlet and OCCRP member. Throughout your career, you have contributed to major international investigations, such as the Panama Papers, the Russian and Azerbaijani laundromat, the Pegasus Project, the Pandora Papers, or the Russian asset tracker. And together with your colleague Jan Kuciak, you exposed the ties between the Italian mafia and the Slovak government. But after Jan was murdered, you helped finish his story, investigated the murder, and with your team unraveled one of the most jaw-dropping corruption scandal in the European Union, implicating senior judges, police figures, and eventually bringing down a whole government. This story is told in the documentary The Killing of Journalists. Your work has been recognized with several awards, including the ICFG Knights Journalism Award, and alongside your colleague Arpad Soltsek and Eva Kubaniova, the World Justice Project Anthony Lewis Prize. Thank you very much for being here, and we are really glad to hear you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. As you can see, I made a mistake, so let's go to another slide. Okay, so the question that was there, and I forgot to put an A there. It was why journalism is not a question of like or influence. Well, actually, when I saw, thank you. When I saw this question, I was like, but wait. like we are getting to the time when actually journalism is question of likes and influence, and we need to accept it. And I would like to, tell stories here how, journalism matters. Everyone is reading those hard-hitting, dry stories. Everyone is like, yes, let's do it. Well, it's not. We, as investigative journalists, we are competing with kittens, and we can never beat them, because the stories we are showing are facts. And the facts are usually dry because we anticipate that we actually are going to be sued, and we will go to the court to defend our stories and defend the truth. But let me start from the beginning. I will talk from the beginning. When I started to work as a journalist, it was in online news 20 years ago. So online news was really like a big thing. It was still the idea that online news could actually finance itself by advertisement. It never materialized, but at that time we still believed that online news are good. And my job was having a night shifts when I was pretty much, putting into the system agency news. It was a lame job, and I hated it, and I quit. And 2 years later, I joined something that was much more human rights activism than investigative journalism. And only in year, let's say 2010, I started to hear about investigative reporting. And I was like, yeah, when I grow up, I would like to do this. And I had no idea what does it mean to be investigative reporter. I had no idea how to do it, but still I decided those are cool guys at OCCRP, what stands for Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and I would like to work with them. So I set up an investigative center in Prague, Czech Republic, and I joined them, and I provided information from this region, and slowly, step by step, I started to write stories for them. And this is when I felt hard how actually truth matters, at least to some very powerful people. The first story I've done was together with Khadija Ismailova. She's Azerbaijani journalist, award-winning, amazing, amazing friend. And we did a story how, family of Azerbaijani president is laundering money through investments into real estate in Czech Republic. And in Czech Republic, everyone was like, boring, next. But in Azerbaijan, it was a big story, and she got arrested. And she got arrested on tax fraud. And she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. And then it felt very unfair, that, she is going to the prison for telling the truth. Anyway, she got out of the prison after a year and a half because Amal Clooney offered to represent her. But actually, the daughters of the president explained him that he doesn't want it. So she got out of the prison, and we met, and we talked about her life in prison and about the truth. And she decided, even through this experience, that actually she wants to keep on working and keep on doing investigative reporting. Another story that actually illustrates the truth is important is a story of Sasha Mialkov. Sasha Mialkov is now former head of Secret Service in how is it called now? Macedonia. Well, let me use the wrong name. And once again, I talked to my colleagues from Macedonia, and they told me, it seems that our head of Secret Service actually has a permanent residency in Czech Republic and owns a lot of real estate there. So I did, I mapped the real estate, I checked his residency, he had permanent residency. What is kind of weird for someone who is head of Secret Service of another country, and we reported the story. This time no one went to prison, but for me it was important, to really see that this story reported and published in Czech Republic and republished in Macedonia protected the journalist and made the first crack on a government that seems to be that we can't get rid of it. And within 3 years, the government failed because this first crack actually inspired other people to do more reporting on the government and publish more stories and bring more evidence about their corruption. Yeah, also slides. So, you know, we have 3 steps that we need to fight for as in-depth investigative journalists, and that's verify truth, deliberate with others over what matters and what doesn't, and hold power to account. Actually, investigative reporting has a definition that's holding power to account, but now we are in a times that we need to really focus on this because it seems that journalism in this area is really fading. We are not able to hold powerful to account. Look at all those people who went to prison in US charged with drug crimes or any other kind of a frauds and now are being released like the president of Honduras because the president decided so. So we need to hold power to account because we need to show them that there's still someone who cares and who's gonna expose. And maybe the justice system will fail in keeping them in prison, but we will be the first one who will write the draft of the history, what means there will be information that this guy or woman is a fraud, and we need to stick to it. Also, combination of those 3, of truth, deliberation over what matters, and holding account to the power, it's really important for democracy. Not only democracy, it's really important for society, whatever it is, because if we can't agree on what matters, we will never agree what to fight for in case there's war. Okay, and now back to the social networks. You know, we as a journalist for a long time, we believe that we all can write for The Atlantic, let's say, you know, those long, heavy, elite opinion pieces, but actually there's only a very limited market for this. And we need to admit that social media are really media platform. You know, originally it was created, you know, to have fun, to connect with the family, friends, former classmates, whatever, but it became so influential that actually we need to admit as a journalist, we need to understand how to write for social networks because there is growing part of society that are consuming news through social networks. And if we will lose this part of people, especially young people, we will lose the future. So we can't say, like, we are the journalists, we are reporting the truth and people will find it. It's not enough. We need to do more and we need to understand how to write for social networks and how to reach more people. Yeah, because you know, social networks make you feel good. Okay, so this is not the design I wanted, but anyway, it's the design. The last point I want to make that, you know, we have new technology tools that are making our lives easier. And, you know, with those tools, we have to fight them. And we have to, you know, we are all using it, and it's really hard to get out of the way of using those tools as AI wrap-ups that are actually killing journalism, or, you know, AI as assistant for telling you, summarizing the documents and links and so on. We just, you know, we as society, not as a journalist or single people, we really need to get back on a track and fight our comfort zones in using all those ways that are simple, that are showing that, you know, the world is simple, the truth is simple, the world is black and white, and we need to go back out of the comfort zone just to feel and to understand that this is not the way we as humanity should develop. I think this is the last slide I had, and I think that's pretty much the time I had, right?
Thank you very much. You can stay on stage, and I have the honor to welcome Francisca Elias and Anna Volte. They are students from the Sciences Po Journalism School, and they will have a chat with you.
Hi, Pavla. Thank you so much for your talk.
Yes, so to dig right in, investigative journalism can point out injustices, as you described, but not every research tackles a government. Sometimes we see a little change in a situation after it's reported on. So what is then the value of investigative journalism? What do we always do it for?
Right. You know, that's a question I ask every Friday when I'm going to burn out, like why I am still doing it. But there is one thing that's important for investigative journalism, and that's that the stories can stand up in a time. What means, you know, when we published the story of the head of Secret Service of Macedonia in Czech Republic, nothing happened. And nothing happened for 3 years, and then it actually happened. So we really should take journalism as not like, I'm going to write a story and the government will fall, but much more as I'm going to write a story. Someone's talking. I'm going to write a story because I don't want anyone to be able to say, well, I didn't know.
Many of us here today are just at the beginning of our careers in journalism. So with this in mind, we wanted to ask you, when you were starting out, what were some of your expectations going into the job of investigative journalism, and how do they differ from your reality now?
Well, I wanted to be war reporter. Well, I ended up in investigative journalism. What regarding the victims is pretty much the same, you know. It seems, well, not now with Ukraine and Gaza, but there was a point before the war in Ukraine and Gaza when actually more journalists were assassinated because of investigative reporting than in war zones. You know, I just want to, I was always intrigued by complex stories, and that's why I got into investigative reporting. I also studied journalism and South American studies. What, you know, the clear outcome is to be interested in organized crime and global cocaine trade. And it was fun.
Perfect. You reported on some very difficult stories. You already touched on that. You investigated the murder of a friend. You faced severe online harassment, even by influential figures. So what is your advice to young journalists? How can we, and how can also newsrooms, make space or like deal with the mental toll that this job can sometimes bring?
Well, it's a new thing. Finally, we started to talk about the mental issues reporters have, but it's really like last 3-4 years. Before it was a huge taboo, and some of the investigative centers, like is mine, they have different kinds of aspects to these issues, like paying for therapy to the reporters, giving them 7 weeks of holidays just to really recover. But I see it on my colleagues, everyone is burning out. So we need you, young people, to really help, because you are still, you know, full of energy and less cynical than we are. And I think the future of investigative reporting is really now on young people. So I'm afraid to tell you that, come on, please help.
And do you have any personal strategies that you apply to keep in this, to stay in this job?
Yeah, I took a year off when I was really burned out. It helped. And I met at Stanford University with another 14 totally burnt up journalists. So we shared our difficult life. We shared our stories, how to recover, and what I've learned, what really helps is running in the morning and reading really shitty novels in the evening, because it really helps to disconnect from the work.
And to sort of touch on that, but where do you draw the line between your own personal safety and kind of the task of journalism and information? Because after the murder of your friend and colleague, Jan Kuciak, have you ever made decisions not to pursue something because it could be too dangerous, or do you always choose to pursue the story?
I always choose to pursue the story, even though I know it's quite dangerous. The only thing is that I don't really publish when the story is ready. It's especially when reporting on organized crime. We sometimes have so-called cooling off period before publishing the story. So we do the interviews, we confront people from organized crime, and then we know that they are really upset, so we give them 6 months to get ready, and only then we publish the story. It's the good thing with organized crime is, it's still, even after 6 months, it's still, the story is still working.
You said that, I quote, "Collaboration can save your life," and that killing a network is impossible. What do you think, what would newsrooms, or what would more collaboration and less ego in journalism look like in journalistic training and in newsrooms?
I mean, I don't know. I grew up in this collaborative group of journalists that we've never seen each other as a competition, and the first time I actually faced, big egos in journalism was when I was trying to create such a network in Czech Republic of investigative reporters who, well, we have the same aim, let's share, and it never happened. And I think you should be ready as a young journalist that some of the biggest disappointments in journalism would come from your colleague journalists. So it's difficult. Just get over it.
When you say that, just to touch on that, the biggest disappointments, do you mean in terms of, could you elaborate on that a little bit? How have your colleagues or other journalists disappointed you in the past?
It's for me, the most forming experience was this network of investigative reporters called OCCRP, and we've never seen each other as a kind of a competition or something. We were always eager to help each other because apart from being journalists, we were also friends. And then I was, my head or my mental setting was pretty much like, we are all friends, so let's share. So when we got Panama Papers, the first truly global league for investigative journalists, and I offered the other editorial teams in Czech Republic, well, give me one of your investigative reporters and we can work on it together. It failed because they told me like, who you are, some girl, little girl who's giving the data, give us all the data, give us exclusivity, and we might work on it, otherwise not. They were not willing to cooperate, and for me it was like, guys, I'm giving you something and you're giving me conditions under which I can give it to you, like, what the hell?
Thank you so much for your responses so far. I think now we're going to open up the floor to some questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hands now. I'm sure there are lots.
Hi, thank you. You're a founder as well, and you talked a little bit less about that. Can you say a little bit about how that experience of being a founder has worked or not worked with being a journalist?
Yeah, well, I have a friend and colleague who's saying once you become a founder, you stop being a journalist, and he's pretty much right. And it's experience of all of us, like founders of those investigative centers, that we are spending much more time than we want to on management, fundraising, and other stuff. And I don't enjoy it, to put it in a nice terms, but it's needed. And I still do journalism, I still do reporting, but it's quite crazy because I need to find the time to do it. At the same time, you know, there was not such a center, there was not any kind of a media. Well, let me start from the beginning. I founded the Czech Center for Investigative Reporting because I was trying to find someone who can do cross-border projects. And there was no one like this. No one wanted by the time to do cross-border investigative projects. And I went to many editorial teams like, do you want to join those cool, super financed investigative projects? And everyone said no. So there was not a way how to do it. So I, you know, found a way, and I started this center. And I never wanted to be director of anything. I wanted to be good reporter, but not leading other people. I fail, I try, but now we are a team of 12 people, and I hope we are much more consolidated than 10 years ago. And yeah, it's ups and downs, and I was pretty naive when I founded the center, and I would never do it again. Maybe yes, but I don't know.
Are there any more questions?
One last question, yeah.
Hello, and excuse me. Thank you for your speech. I had a question. Have you ever witnessed some colleagues that could not say what they want or in the way they want because of some superiors in the hierarchy? Now that you are a director, do you give some directions to your journalists? And as a journalist before, and more as a young journalist, had you like pressure from superiors to tell the story in a way or in another way? Thank you.
I had superiors for something like half a year only. Then we understood that it doesn't work. So they could not really, I was not really in the situation that I would be breaking some big story and they would be pushing me to do it a different way. With my colleagues, the only discussion we have regarding what they can or can't say is regarding their posts on social networks. That, you know, they said, but it's my personal, private profile, you know, I can say what I want. And we are trying to explain that there is not such a thing as a private, personal profile on social networks. And if they are not willing and able to go in the midnight to an empty street and shout out loud what they just wrote as a post, then they shouldn't do it. And it brought many of my colleagues into trouble, mostly because as an OCCRP network, we are being sued like every other week, but some of the lawsuits in jurisdictions such as London or in Maryland, you know, the split of the costs, of the legal costs is 50-50, no matter who won. So we got sued in London over a tweet, and it was really expensive. And fortunately, it was covered by insurance, but then the insurance company said, this was the last time we covered for you.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for today.
Please, Margaret, Sullivan, and Julie Gerstein, thank you for being here. And for your profile, Florian Reynal and Eva Van Damme. Thank you.
Hello, Margaret Sullivan. You are a columnist for The Guardian US and the executive director of the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics and Security at Columbia Journalism School. You were the longest-serving public editor at the New York Times and the first woman in that role. You also were the Washington Post media columnist and the chief editor of your hometown daily, the Buffalo News. You are the author of 2 books, Ghosting the News and Newsroom Confidential. Looking forward to your discussion.
Thank you.
Hi, it's my pleasure to introduce the upcoming guest speaker, Julie Gerstein. You are currently working as a research fellow at the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University. You're former executive editor for Business Insider, where you were also the founding bureau chief of the Singapore office. And additionally, you were an editor at BuzzFeed. And alongside Margaret Sullivan, you contributed to New Look on Journalism Ethics report, dealing with the new ethical challenges for journalists.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to be here. It's great to be in Paris, and it's really a great privilege to speak to young journalists. So Julie and I did a big sweeping look at whether it was appropriate to have a fresh view of journalism ethics because of this moment we're in, the digital age, the moment of AI, a time when politicians seem to be lying more than ever before. And we looked at a bunch of different topics, but because our time is limited today, if you want to see the whole thing, you can read it in Columbia Journalism Review. If you look at sort of our names and journalism ethics, you'll find the whole 6-part series. But today, because our time is limited, we want to narrow it down to just 2 topics, whether we need a fresh look at objectivity and the ethical challenges around AI. So, Julie, you want to say a few things before we start?
Thanks so much for having us. I want to say that we worked on this project over 2024 into 2025, and obviously a lot was going on
in the world.
And we really wanted to speak to kind of the challenges of our particular crises in the US, but I think that a lot of these issues are more global, despite a lot of our research around how newsrooms have been disappearing and local news sources are going away. We know that's happening in the US, and we know that there's fewer sources abroad as well.
So just to jump into one of our 2 major topics, the question of whether we need a new look at objectivity. So, if you ask sort of regular people like the audience or readers, do you think objectivity is a good idea? They will definitely say yes, they do. But in practice, it seems like what we often have is a kind of objectivity that doesn't really work that well anymore, because where's it coming from? And sort of the question that arises is, whose objectivity is it? And so this business of objectivity as the view from nowhere is something to consider. We all have issues, we all have beliefs, and we all have sort of experiences, and what is it we bring to the table? And then at that point, I think we can challenge our own confirmation biases. We can say, well, I've always thought this, but I'm going to report against that, and look at things a little bit differently. The other thing that comes up with traditional objectivity as a problem is what has kind of been termed both sidesism, and both sidesism is a practice in which, like, lies and truth are treated kind of equally, and that's not journalism. We really shouldn't be saying, well, some people say that it's raining outside and some people say the sky is blue. We should go outside and find out what's going on. So, our effort is to push back in a thoughtful way against traditional objectivity by saying, yes, we want to bring an open mind to every story, but so much comes down to how a story is framed. What do we choose to look at? What do we choose to investigate? what headline is on it, what photo is with it. All these things come from someplace, and so it's kind of not appropriate to call it, to subscribe to this view from nowhere. And I always like to present the opposite argument here, which a former boss of mine, Marty Barron at the Washington Post, and if you've ever seen the movie Spotlight, great movie, Marty was, at that time, you know, he was depicted by Liev Schreiber, but he was the editor of the Boston Globe. And Marty's point of view on objectivity is, yes, we do need traditional objectivity, because what it really means is the method that we come into a story with, that we come in with an open mind and we attempt to challenge and prove it along the way. So, you know, there are different ways to look at this. I think our point of view is that the old style objectivity that informed newsrooms and informed decision-making for a long time is outdated, and yet we still want to, we hope that journalists do come into every story with an open mind.
Earlier, there was a mention about social media as an issue for a lot of journalists, and especially, I think there's this tension between what people feel as individuals and what they are responsible for as journalists. That really, for many journalists, came to a head in 2020 during the racial reckoning, and after followed by the murder of George Floyd. And what came out of that was really a lot of people said, you know, this white Western ideal of objectivity, it doesn't allow me as a journalist to express myself. And that became more of an issue because newsrooms have become more diverse. The other thing that we're seeing is that there is a generational divide on objectivity. So there's a lot of younger journalists who feel that the construct of objectivity has to go, and they're more comfortable thinking about journalism in terms of advocacy. But you know, there's also others who argue that, you know, moving towards a pragmatic objectivity or solutions journalism is perhaps the way forward.
I feel like this is, you know, each one of these topics is so rich, and we could probably spend the whole day talking about any one of them, objectivity or AI or the topics that have already come up. But I think we'll move to the question of AI in the newsroom, because it's very fraught. It's very much in the moment. And as Jessica said in her talk, it's like sort of the new bubble. The one thing that I've found is that as newsroom leaders come up with their, you know, guidebooks, their style books, they're almost immediately outdated by the way AI is moving so quickly through newsrooms. It's incredible. I mean, I've actually had a standards editor say to me, oh yeah, we wrote these rules, and then I look at our website and the rules are being broken in real time, you know, in our very publication. So it's really a fast-moving thing, and it's both tremendously, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of room for it to go wrong. So, but Julie's very good on this subject, so I'll hand it off to her.
Yeah, I think, you know, probably all of us are aware that AI as a concept has been around for a while. I think that the thing that we're dealing with in newsrooms now is this construct of generative AI, you know, and kind of how is that being used, and is it potentially putting journalists out of work? Is it potentially a problem for newsrooms in terms of accountability? And then also, you know, there's also the opportunities of AI. So AI models are fed by our writing, by the work that journalists and newsrooms do. And for some publications, a lot of publications, part of their funding model is now, you know, licensing their content to these AI models. So it creates an interesting dependence between these two things that are, I think, fundamentally at odds. We all know that...
It's kind of behind you.
There we go. We all know that there are some problems with AI. I've used this image a lot as an example of AI generating, ChatGPT generating images of a 1943 German soldier. So it has bias, implicit bias, but then it also sometimes will overcorrect and hallucinate. And generative AI, the results are only as good as the data on which it's trained. And so, as we become a more divided, striated society, we're going to see more extreme viewpoints and more misinformation coming from both sides, and that's going to feed these AI engines, unfortunately. So that said, I think a lot of newsrooms are still really enamored by AI, and I think generally businesses are. We're in a little bit of a bubble where everybody's just kind of saying, use AI, whether it makes sense or not, use AI, figure it out, figure out a way to do this. And it's sort of created a little bit of, or a lot of chaos in the newsroom. And as Margaret mentioned, a lot of what standards editors have been doing is trying to kind of establish, how do we address AI? How do we handle something like this? And how do we make it clear to our readers and our journalists what we expect of them? So, the main thrust of what a lot of newsrooms have come up with is like these three sort of main principles, which have to do with transparency and attribution of AI. And then also accountability. So if something is published that has incorrect information from AI, who is held responsible? And then thirdly, and I think most importantly, the idea of human in the loop to review. So these policies are kind of, coming out, and these AI tools are competing with each other. They're competing with newsrooms. They're competing with social media platforms, and they're competing with, and they're in an environment where more and more people are not getting their information from traditional news sources. And, according to a recent Pew poll, around 10% of Americans say they now get their news from sources like ChatGPT and Gemini, which,
it's probably more now.
Yeah, this is terrifying.
Last week, I think.
Yeah. And even though they also, they'll say that, but they'll also simultaneously say, we don't trust information anymore. And it's like, well, you guys are doing it to yourselves. But that said, I think that, in all of the work that we've looked at, core ideas of what it is to be a journalist and what the power, the importance of journalism, as Pavla said, to hold power to account, it still holds true, and it's still very important, even as we're sort of figuring out these things and figuring out how do we remain sustainable as an industry? How do we fight ideas about, our lack of credibility with our audiences? And part of what our sources in our research talked a lot about was this idea of how do we engage with the public to make sure that they're understanding what our ethics are, and allowing us to have a conversation around what are journalism ethics in the public space, because a lot of people have very poor media literacy, and our audiences don't understand how journalism is done. And really, transparency about things like that is how we build trust with our audiences.
So I think, our big takeaway, and I'll just conclude with this, and we can go to some questions if we have the time. is just that, I think, as Julie said, the core beliefs of journalism, that we're there to hold power to account, that we have to be honest about it, that we have to correct our mistakes. Those things haven't changed, but the sort of atmosphere in which we're working is very, very different. And so that's really what our series was trying to do, was to look at this sort of new environment and adjust our, hold fast to the things that make journalism great, but try to bring that into a new world and new environment. So thank you very much.
Let's raise your hands if you have any question.
Hi, thank you. Oh, sorry, a bit loud. Thank you so much for your talk. I had a question about objectivity and social media, and how, because we all recognize that social media is so important today and kind of in terms of opening up the conversation and sharing information. But at the same time, algorithms on social media reward a very specific kind of content, content that's not very objective, that's more opinionated, that's quite controversial. And with this in mind, how can we reconcile using social media to kind of promote and gain attention, but for objective journalism? Like, how do we use it to make objective methods kind of popular in an age where it rewards a very controversial type of content? Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that for journalists, to keep in mind that nobody out there is waiting for you to post, and that, you could take a minute and think about what you want to say. I agree with you that, presenting things in a very flat way that might be sort of apparently objective isn't going to get you the engagement that you might be looking for, but I still think that it has to be grounded in your reporting and not in, some sort of outlandish opinion about it, because it's going to get you in trouble. And, we've seen that happen over and over again. So it's always a good idea to, walk away from your phone for a moment, and take a beat and say, am I actually, as Pavla said, would you actually be comfortable with this being associated with you for all time, or be willing to shout it in the streets? If not, maybe there's a slightly tempered way to say it.
I would also add that your social media can be a way for you to talk about your process, and that can be a very powerful thing. Again, if we're talking about news journalism losing a sense of legitimacy, at least definitely in the US, in a major way it has, then showing how you built it, I think, is a very, very useful tool. I showed Margaret this recently. There's some Vox affiliate, believe it or not, in Texas, I want to say. They've started putting at the bottom of their stories the sources that they reference in the stories. So if they got information from Defense Department, they did interviews, whatever it is, they'll put that down there. And it's a little thing, but I think it, again, increases credibility and helps people feel like there was work put into this.
One last question, Victoria.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for your talk. I had a question about AI and the deals that they might sign with medias. In France, it happened recently with like 2 big medias. I think it has to do with revenue streams and the data being taken by the AI anyways. It's crazy to think that we have people controlling the news, like a lot of power, little power controlling a lot of the news, and then on top, GAFAM controlling that. What's your take, would be your take on how is that gonna evolve? What do you think should be done?
It's gonna go not well.
I mean, we've got this sort of tension that's always been in journalism between the business side and the revenue side and the journalism side. But it's, I think, really intense now with what you're talking about. And there's, so much trouble with business models of journalism that this is seen as, a great way to shore ourselves up, and yet it decreases trust, it's full of problems and horrible disasters that happen, and, it really needs to be handled very judiciously, but there's a lot pushing against that. So there's a tension there that's really problematic.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now it's Bruno Fonseca's turn. Let's come on stage. Thank you. And for your profile, it's Carla Cagnero, who is also a student from Sciences Po Journalism School.
Thank you. So, editor-in-chief at Agenzia Pubblica, Bruno Fonseca holds both a master's and bachelor's degree in communication from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. He has a long trajectory of more than 10 years at Agenzia Pubblica, starting as a reporter focusing on data-driven investigations, politics, and access to information. Both his own work and the work of teams he had led have been recognized with awards, and some of these projects include the coverage of the 2023 Brazil election, focusing on the climate emergency, and the investigative series Escravizadores, a year-long investigation conducted by his team to analyze the ancestors of the Brazilian political elite and uncover how the country's slave-holding past continues to shape its national politics nowadays. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. So, bonjour, je m'appelle Bruno Fonseca, je suis journaliste brésilien, je suis très heureuse pour parler avec vous, and this is how far my French goes, so from now on I will continue in English. I put some captions here so it can make it easier for you to understand if I go for myself. So today I'm here representing my work and the work of my colleagues at Agenzia Pública. Agenzia Pública is a non-profit investigative journalism outlet in Brazil. We were founded almost 15 years ago. This is the team of Pública. That is me. I've been in Pública for almost 12 years, and today I'm here for a quick talk about emotions in journalism. So, where should I put my emotions when I'm reporting? To answer that, I broke this difficult topic in 3 reflections. And to begin with, I think it's an important question for us to ask, what kind of emotions are we talking about? Is it anger, is it kind of indignation, or is it like the opposite, like compassion, humor? Do you feel like compassion towards a group that you feel represented by, or the opposite? Do you intend the audience to feel the same emotion that you're feeling? Is this kind of an objective of your reporting? And do you feel comfortable to share these emotions with your team, your editor, for instance? Emotions are very complex, and I think throughout my career I have learned that when you try to hide or run from your emotions, normally they run faster than you. So my first reflection would be for us to think, try to identify and analyze what's the emotion that's beyond re-reporting. Very often the emotions are already there. They're shaping the hypothesis of your reporting. They're conducing what you're aiming to, who you're talking to, and what are the sources that you're looking for. These emotions can harm, of course. This is, I think, is a more obvious point, because emotions, they can hinder the way you're doing your report and how far you're going, what's the depth of your reporting. But I think that, on the other hand, emotions can also help your reporting. I think that anger, indignation, compassion, even humor can be very powerful tools for us as reporters. I think sometimes being emotionally connected to the subject can drive your reporting, can give you creative ideas for you to bring new stories or new perspectives to older stories. I I bring this up because I think it's an important part for us to journalism that I think, and more people have talked about this today, that journalism has a power and a commitment to reveal power relations that can be normalized in society, by culture, by politics. And I think this has also to do with emotions. And I'm going to give an example. One of the major investigations that we did in Agência Pública, which was presented here, was called the Enslavers Project. I coordinated this project with my colleagues for the last 2 years. It's still going on. This is the logo of the project. It's Escravizadores in Portuguese. Here is the QR code if you can look up. This is an English version. It was financed by the Pulitzer Center. And for more than a year, we dedicated ourselves to investigate the ties between the current Brazilian elite politicians and major enslavers from the past in Brazil. We traced more than 100 generations of politicians, from presidents to governors to actual senators in Brazil. And we found out we could map more than 30 politicians that had lines, family lines, to these major enslavers in Brazil over the past 300 years of Brazilian history. This was a reporting inspired by other reporting other outlets done. For instance, Reuters in the US, they made something quite this. The Guardian also did this concerning their founders in the UK. And I think that a key part of this investigation was a sense of commitment to not preserve this slavery past in Brazil as something normal, something that should not be reported on. And it's obvious that behind this commitment, there is a kind of emotion. There is a kind of sense of injustice that we as journalists should tackle on. That emotion was very important for us to drive this project. But since we have analyzed and identified this emotion, what should we do? How do we tackle this emotion during, for instance, this one-year-long project? The second step, I think it's important, is to share these emotions with the team and trying to make some plans on how to process and how to conduct your investigation within these emotions. This project, for instance, it involved more than 20 people in our newsroom, and people have different levels of emotional involvement with this topic. Some team members also, they couldn't even discover they had relatives that were enslaved through this kind of genealogy investigation. And for our black colleagues, this is a very serious topic that can sparkle different kinds of emotions. So it was this very, very, very important for us to have a clear methodology and transparent methodology on how we would do this investigation. How should we focus on the politicians and try to avoid bias on selecting who we were going to research, for instance? How we would ensure that the politicians that we were telling, oh, your family had this slavery background 300 years ago, how would we ensure that they would receive the material that we are digging up and they would have time and also information to come back to us? How we would create also some internal checking process so we didn't make mistakes. This was very important for us on such a sensitive topic. I do think that investigative journalism sometimes is kind of a solitary job, but I think that being in a newsroom and sharing this with our colleagues is a very important way, such for us to deal with the perks of the investigation and also with the emotions. I know that working with a team can create conflict. I think other people also here also tackle on this subject. But I think it's better for us to distribute these emotional burdens. I think it's always a good step if you share with your colleagues, your editors, all the emotions that you're feeling, your insecurities, so you can reach out and try to get to a solution that's more transparent and more collaborative. In this sense, and since we're talking with students, I think it's a good thing that today, especially in Brazil, but I know more, we're kind of moving away from this investigative reporter, like fiction superhero persona that you cannot feel fear, you cannot feel insecurities, you're not affected by what you're reporting, and this is not the truth. So I think it's a good thing that newer generations are bringing these emotions and this kind of new approach to the journalism to our practice. I think this is a good thing that I'm seeing over the past 20 years with younger people, and I think this is a good thing that we are progressing in this road. And since we are talking about emotions, I want to talk a little bit about another emotion, that's compassion. I think that a journalist that fails to care about what they're reporting on, sometimes we have more difficult time even to engage the audience and to make people also feel that this is important for them. I think we have been talking about social media, how to engage with people, and sometimes I think the spark or the vision can come from your true compassion with the people you're reporting on. I think sometimes journalism can go to a cynic road, and I think that this is part of the job. We get tired, we burn out, we tackle a lot with hard subjects, but I think that's important for us to remember that sometimes it's in ourselves, this first compassion, this way of caring with people or telling stories that might otherwise be thinking of something minor or something that's not very important. And I think this is a good emotion sometimes to bring to the reporting. And also, I think this can help engagement with audience, not only younger audience, but every kind of one. Nonetheless, I think that compassion must be developed within a framework and some guidelines, because otherwise you're going to get too invested, and this can hinder even your investigation. So this is the third point. I think that also compassion and emotions, they involve commitment and responsibility, and this needed to be mapped when you're doing a big term, for instance, investigation. Some years ago, we did a very difficult reporting on a conference in Brazil that was offering methods on how to convert LGBT people in Brazil. It was a gathering from churches all along Brazil and other countries, especially Latin America, and would invite people to teach them and also teach church leaders on how to convert people from stopping being LGBT+. And this was a very emotional, difficult investigation for us to do because of the topic, as you can think, but also because of the nuance of that reality. When I arrived at the event, it was taken on a rural site in Brazil, it was like far away from the city. I encountered many people in deep distress. So there were mothers, there were young people, they were claiming to be cured or converted. People with very sad backgrounds of violence, sexual abuse. So it was a very an emotional, difficult space to be in. And you can imagine how hard it is to report on this topic, even to talk with people there. And this could also hinder the reporting or even incapacitate me and my team to break up with the story there. So it was very important for this investigation, for instance, for us to have some guidelines so we didn't fail and fall to all these emotions there. First, we defined the relevance and the focus of this investigation. We decided that was a very important part for us to show and expose the network of power and money that was involved in this conversion therapy group. There were people there that wanted to get more money to fund projects in Brazil, to allocate people in and have more projects in this on their cities. There are people who later campaigned for politicians in Brazil. It was also important for us to keep in mind that reporting sometimes can get subjective, but there are legal frameworks that we need to talk about. For instance, in Brazil, if you offer this kind of therapy as a psychological service, this is illegal. So it was important for us to map out and say, oh, this is legal, this is not, this is according to the law. So we don't fall to this like, oh, it's my opinion that this thing is not correct. This was very important for us to keep in mind and map out all the problems and criminal problems for this kind of event. For us, it was also important that reporting also brought the nuances of that. We could not like just picture people there as being like just villainous. It was a kind of a tricky subject because there are many people there who had suffered for instance, sexual abuse, and they were there teaching and teaching people there on how to deal with it. People there was in immense distress, people who were expelled from their families, people who were in the streets. So it was very important for us for the reporting what was doing there and when was right and when I get back to give these nuances so people could understand what were the cultural and social implications of this kind of event. Another important decision was not to go alone. I think this is a very important tip that you could take for your projects. Every time that this is possible, I think it's good. I think you have a support, another person to share with, so you can keep track of your emotions, your methods, what you're failing at, and even for like risky situations. We also had guides on how to keep the editors and the team informed. So I think this is very important if you go on a field trip or any kind of reporting that is far away from the newsroom. We also had some guidelines of how to deal with people. This is, it applied on this kind of reporting, but I think it helps in lots of other ones. Sometimes it's hard for you to listen to traumatic experiences from other people. And it's important for you to have a guideline until which step are you willing to go and which step makes sense to go. For instance, in this event, we decided not to approach people and make them remember and revisit their traumatic experience, because they were already having like this kind of spaces there to discuss this. So we settled as observers, so we could listen to them and not make them have to revisit all this kind of traumatic experiences. And we also decided that the final article should be as narrative as possible, so it could bring all these nuances, all the motivations and the problems that people that brought people there. The legal boundaries, as I said, like the criminal implications of this kind of experiences. And also my own, how I felt being there, but keeping in mind that sometimes, no, every time I think you have to think if you're not putting yourself in the front of what people there are feeling. I think it's sometimes it's rich for journalists to be transparent and say, where are you coming from when we're reporting, what did you feel, what were the obstacles that you faced there. But I think you have to keep in mind there is a fine balance between what is you and what's the story and what people are truly living there. And I say this because this is a risk that I see often with younger journalists. I think it's important for us to develop this kind of guidelines so you don't overlap too much on what you're feeling and what you're reporting. I don't think this happens only to younger journalists. Not at all. But I think I have seen with younger journalists at Pública in Brazil, sometimes this kind of line between advocating for a cause and what you're reporting on. Sometimes it's important for you to trace this line so you know and you have even your feelings accountable. I think it's important for you to preserve your reporting and also to preserve yourselves. I think most of the times, there's this kind of emotional burdens that journalists have a very difficult time talking about and sharing with your colleagues, and I don't think that's a good practice. I don't think that these solutions are universal. I think that it depends on which topic, which investigation you're dealing with. I think that if you have time, if you have a team that you can share with, it's always, always, always good to share, to establish these guidelines, to make questions, to say, oh, I'm not comfortable with this, which is the route I should go, what are the limits that I should have with this reporting. And also, I think that you should always consider the stress and the labor aspects of your reporting. A tired journalist, a stressed journalist sometimes can make mistakes, and also sometimes it hinders defining this line between what you're doing and what you should be doing on the reporting. To summarize, I think this would be like the 3 main steps that I try to do when I do more in-depth investigations or when I coordinate in the team. So it's to identify and analyze the emotions involved in the investigation, share these emotions with the team, and define methods and ethical limits. And remember that emotions involve commitment and responsibilities that should be met. And I think this because it involves responsibilities with the team, with the people that you're reporting at, and also with the public, the audience. I was very quick on all this reporting, but I think you can, if you want, you can check out these 2 URLs. These are 2 very important projects for us, Agência Pública, and also I decided to bring this here today because I think these 2 projects, they tackle with this kind of emotions that come up with our reporting, like seeing a social problem that you think is not correct, but how do you tackle them without crossing the line of fine journalism? So I think there are good examples. And here are my contacts. I'm really open to share, to trade experience. We have had amazing time in Publica working with students in journalism. I think sometimes we can learn a lot with them. We did a great coverage on Brazilian elections. It was done with 6 different universities in Brazil. And I think it's collaboration is a key for journalism, as people have presented today. But I think that collaboration with universities can be very powerful tools for us to bring new kinds of journalism, new visions, and new formatting to reporting. So if you want, just text me and I will answer as soon as I can.
With Vittoria Barreto and Lilith Chaverdian for the chat. Thank you.
Oi, Bruno.
Oi.
Thank you so much for being here and for all your wonderful reporting. First thing that comes to mind is, could you tell us about one specific experience when someone you were interviewing reached an emotional peak, and what did it teach you about how to respond to these kind of situations?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I had some different kind of emotional peaks. For instance, there's the kind of anger emotional peak when you're interviewing someone that tries to attack you. I have reported on gun violence and gun control in Brazil. So sometimes dealing with these pro-gun groups, they can be very aggressive, especially when you're a journalist in Brazil. So I think it's very important for you to have like this kind of limits, know until which step do you go. I have had to quit some reporting because it was risky for me. And it was important for me to know until which point should I go, and also to come back and share this with my colleagues. I think it's important because then you can send another report to continue the investigation, and we can share how you're feeling. You can plan out if you continue on this subject or not. But also I have the other kind of emotional experience because when you interview people in distress, when they're feeling or experiencing something very harmful, this can impact you. And it can impact you like days, weeks after you've done your reporting. So I think that the best advice I would give is not to try to cover this up. I think you should like really keep track on how this is affecting you, get back to your colleagues. If you're not feeling well to continue this subject, try to find other ways to report on this, find other subjects, change with your editors. I think this is important so you don't break up And sometimes you can get back to the same story later on, and it will be a much more safe perspective for you.
So you talked about this briefly in your presentation, but could you maybe elaborate on what should a reporter avoid doing when covering emotional subjects?
Well, I think trying to hide these emotions or think that you don't have them, I think this is a bad tackle on this. Most of the times, reporters, they're driven by some kind of emotion, as I said, some kind of indignation or anger, and I think it's important for you to map this out. And mapping this out, I mean, what you're going to do if you don't find this information? What are the plans that you have to try to find this information? How are you going to frame the story later on so you don't tackle the subject just for one bias or just one vision, especially when you're dealing with something very emotionally burdened. So I think I would say that the best advice is not to think that these emotions are not playing part on this investigation, and share with your colleagues. I think that I keep insisting on this, but I think it's important for you to share this information, this experience.
You've worked on long format reporting. You had told me a year for the Slavers projects, for example. You did an investigation into how half of Brazil's presidents and just generally political elites descend from people who owned enslaved people or suppressed Black and poor communities. You talked a lot about this methodology, but for your team. But how did you balance the need to remain fact-based with the moral outrage such topics may invoke in you?
Well, of course, it's hard to report on this subject because there's a sense of how bad slavery was, and it still has its effects on Brazil. And it was even hard when the reporting was out on the public, that we have some critics saying that we shouldn't report on this is a kind of historical problem that's over, what's the relevance of this? So I think that what held me on a safe position, even to coordinate other people, was to really remain strictly as I could to the methods and what we were doing with the investigation. So we have different roles for everyone in our team. We have fact-checking routines between our team to map out any kind of mistakes. Another thing is that I think it's important for you to be transparent and brave enough to see and move your path when you have a mistake. We postponed, I think, 3 times this project because we needed more time to be very sure of what we were doing. We also were very transparent with the politicians. We sent them all the information we gathered, and we gave them, I think, 1 month for them to check all the information and come back to us. And luckily, we didn't have any kind of lawsuit or any kind of contestant until today. So I think that, I know you cannot do this with everyday reporting or like any kind of investigation, but if you have the time and if it's a sensitive topic, I think that being transparent, having this plan mapped out, I think it's very important. We also publish in this reporting and also I think all of our data stories, all the methodology, all the sources, all the data sources that we use, so people can download it and do the same reporting that we did. And this is a good thing, not only from the transparency and for the safety of your reporting, but also for the audience, because we got, for instance, this slavery project. It was used on Brazil schools and universities because professors and teachers could download our data and teach people how to search their genealogy and do the same research as we did.
And one last question to conclude the session. Given your strengths in data-driven journalism, how do you think emotion fits into data journalism?
Well, I don't like when I find other data journalists, they say, oh, I like data because I don't have to deal with people. I don't think this is a good approach. I think that data is just like a tool for you to develop your journalism, any kind of reporting, and it doesn't have to be separate from like conventional journalism. For instance, we did a data reporting on Brazil, that we went through more than 100 people who were going to be displaced for the Olympics in Rio in 2016. So it was important for us to show the data, like how many people, how many houses, where would these people go, but also the stories that come with this data. So what were their names? How many children did they have? How much did they earn? How were they going to survive and make their living? So I think it's important to keep the data as a tool that you can use, but I don't believe in making like this kind of data journalism separate from human stories. I don't think that's the point. And I think that conventional journalists should not fear to tackle with data, but data journalists should not fear to tackle with humans. I think bringing both of these words is the best option always.
Well, muito obrigada, Bruno. Thank you very much.
De nada. Muito obrigado, pessoal.
Thank you. You can stay here, Bruno, because it's time for the panel. So let's come on stage again. And thank you to you too. And we have also Margaret Sullivan, Julie Gerstein, Pavla Holcova, who are part of this panel. And for the moderation, it's Stanislaw Nakliki and David Struder. Thank you.
Should I scoot down? No. What? Just that chair now.
Merci. I don't do the slides. We can share.
About collaboration.
So welcome back. It's very nice to have all four of you now here on stage. This panel is following one question: are rules and ethics for journalism gone? Which kind of presupposes that there might have been a sort of golden age where these rules were really present. I still want to ask a rather drastic question: has there been such a golden age? And if so, when was it? And I'd like to have a small answer of everybody, just to have a global image.
Do you want us to go down the line here? You're up, I guess.
So, do I understand it right? Like, when was the age of golden?
Yeah,
golden.
Exactly.
Well, shortly, something like 100 years after inventing of the printing press. Then it's decline.
Good answer.
I mean, I think journalists and newsrooms are staffed by. They are human beings, and newsrooms are staffed by human beings, so there always are mistakes and misjudgments, but I don't believe there was a moment in time when everything was perfect and that it's so different now. No, I kind of don't accept that as a construct.
Yeah, I think that the problems have changed, probably, and our concept of the problems have changed. From 100 years ago, say, when like the modern era of journalism ethics kind of took hold, and the things that we're facing as journalists, but there's always been a problem with those ethics too.
Yeah, I think I don't also believe in a golden age of journalism. It was funny because with this project, the Enslaver project, we also had some pieces of reporting from the past in Brazil that we use it as sources for our project. And we see that sometimes journalism is far from being objective, even like 100 years ago. Not only objective, but not only, I think, ethical. So I don't believe in a past golden age. I prefer to think of golden sparks of journalism that you can have and you will still have on the future.
Where we are now is that a recent survey found that more Americans have confidence in the ICE agency than in mainstream media. In the past, we turned to the ethical principles of journalism to regain that trust, especially after major crises. But can even impeccable ethics still be a response to the plummeting trust today? And I'd like to hear a perspective from the US, but also from Czech Republic and Brazil.
I just want to ask, where is that study from, and why are those two extremely, diverse things being compared to each other? That to me is my first question, and I think, there's a lot of things that you could say about like the decline of trust in this country, in the U.S., and a lot of that has been a very, there's two things. There's the rise of social media. There's the rise of like being able to access voices that previously hadn't had any access points, which is super, super important. And then the other side of that is that we have had a concerted effort on the part of leaders of our country to discredit and demolish trust in the media. And they've been doing that for the last decade plus. So I think that there's, I don't know, it's just a false equivalency to start with ICE and media. But the point remains, like there are plenty of ways back.
So I agree with Julie. I think that's a weird and probably false comparison. But I do think we have a trust problem. And one of the ways that I like to think about this is that journalists should be perhaps less concerned about, going on some kind of campaign to regain trust, and instead thinking about whether their work is consistently trustworthy. Is our work trustworthy? Are we being transparent? Are we correcting our errors? Are we doing the due diligence? Are we, digging into important topics? And I think that is the thing that we can control. I don't know that we can really control how people react to us. Although, it's important to think about it, but to me, doing the work right is the more crucial thing.
And just to add really quick to that, I think that there are external forces that are trying to delegitimize journalism, and then there are the internal forces that we, in newsrooms every day, put upon ourselves that, delegitimize the work that we're doing. And so I think, again, that's where we want to re-examine ethics and ask, how are we actually serving the goal of, protecting small d democracy?
It's really interesting because this brings me to the next question I have. You highlighted it already before in your presentation, the challenges that ethics and rules are facing right now. I would like to ask this question now to Pavla and to Bruno. What are the most serious threats right now? Those who have really an immediate effect on rules and ethics in journalism?
We are being killed. That's probably the biggest threat right now, because, and it's once again, it's such a complex issue. You have politicians who are saying we are the enemies of the state, we are enemy of the people, and then you have total crazy people like in Mexico who just go and kill the journalist. I don't agree with you, so for me the best way, the easiest way is to, kill you. And ethics is super important right now, but, well, let's not die first.
Yeah, I will also add, I think the financial ways to kill journalism, because we have all these big tech problems. I think every newsroom in the world was faced with a challenge with Google and AI researchers syncing out our audiences. I think it's also important to think this because when you consider most of the fact-checking agencies and projects in the world, they were financed for several years for the same groups that control the big media and big techs, and now they're taking this money out, and at the same time they're implementing all this kind of AI search. So I think there's also these financial ways to kill journalism or try to hinder journalism. I think there's another problem that we have, and I think there's a problem that we still don't have answers.
To talk about another ethical challenge, I have a question to Margaret Sullivan and Julie Gerstein. can you give us some examples of the notion of both-sideism that you talked about? Some examples of where that is not an appropriate approach, perhaps something from the current news cycle?
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, we have, a president who lies a lot. I mean, it's proven, it's been documented, books have been written about it, and it's simply the case. And so when we take President Trump's statements at face value and we magnify them in a headline or a news alert, or we treat it as equal with a truthful statement, we are engaging in a very, bad kind of both-sidesism. And, similarly, there's a whole question about whether, Trump hasn't really been doing rallies recently because he's become more isolated, but when he was doing these rallies of like hour-long rants, was it a good idea to take them live and broadcast them live? Because what you were doing there was basically giving credence and handing a megaphone. So that's, the classic thing about both-sidesism is like climate change. Like some people believe that climate change occurs and is caused by human beings. Some don't. Like that's the classic both-sidesism. But now I think we see it in politics and have to be super careful about not doing that.
Yeah, I think that the thing about Trump especially is that this is, the chaos is the point. So the point is to constantly have a stream of lies so that there cannot be accountability. So, it's shock and awe. And so the idea of like, what's happened is that it's almost like newsrooms have like suspended their editorial judgment because there is this thing that's constantly happening that produces news stories.
And there's even a phrase for that, flooding the zone. Mm-hmm. Flooding the zone with all this garbage. It's a good word. And how do you even deal with it? Do you have a full-time fact checker who's like right there every second? How do you deal with it in the course of a single story or a whole news cycle?
Yeah, I think you're touching on something really interesting, which is the future. For now, we've talked about what does not really work in this field, but how does this, or can this framework, and maybe also for us who are young journalists, how can we change, or how can the framework change to really foster rules and ethics in the future? It's an open question to...
we should have stories to share, big stories, big narratives as a society, and we need them to understand what's important to us as society, and we need to shape in this way the bigger public good. We really need to put a brake on individualism and have the common narrative, what is the public good, and then go in that direction, and that it will bring the ethics. At least I believe so, because we will understand that, okay, I am going, to have less money, let's say, or I am going to, I would need to compromise my, super well-being, but it's in a public good. And I am going to do it, I'm going to sacrifice my part of my benefits because I believe it's worth it for the rest of the society. And I want my kids to actually have a better future, and I am going to sacrifice, and it's really like walking them to school instead of driving them by car. Like, it's not really a sacrifice. Sacrifice is a stupid word. But I do understand what is better, bigger, good than the good for myself.
Mm. But does this mean, for example, when you say it's a public good, it should be free for everybody? How do you see it, like in reality, for the functioning of media in general?
I mean, I live in Czech Republic, but I spent a lot of time in Denmark. And I think that comparing to Denmark, Czechs don't understand the common good of the society or of the nation. We are kind of like, whoever will put a flag on a car is an idiot. We do it only when we win hockey, ice hockey. And in Denmark, no, you celebrate by putting out the flag of Denmark. And when I came like, ooh, this is the nation of Nazis, and then I found out that this is their understanding, that they are part of a bigger
entity,
bigger idea that they share. And that was the point when I started to think about like, okay, maybe they do understand, they do understand what is public good and what is the bigger good. And actually that's why they are doing so well.
I think I would also add something that sometimes journalists, they tend to work a lot for other journalists. I'm going to give an example in Brazil. We also had our Trump, who is in jail now in Brazil. Yeah. And we had this time, which also relates to this both sides. During the pandemic, and he was doing his speeches, and all journalists were covering him and reproducing all the lies about the pandemic and COVID and everything. At some point, the journalist decided not to go there and just transmit and make his speech published. And they decided also to join, like the big media in Brazil, and count themselves what were the names of the numbers of the pandemic, how the disease was spreading. And this was very important during the crisis because there was no point on just like reproducing the lies of the former president. So I think sometimes journalists should also think, and this is good for us in the beginning of our careers, are we just reproducing what other journalists are doing? Are we just talking to other journalists? Are just framing the way we should frame? And sometimes not doing the conventional way can be good for us, like to skip this kind of, these predators that they fed on this kind of news cycle.
I love that you said that because, we've been dealing with Trump's White House kicking journalists out of the press pool since his latest and hopefully last term. And I actually think this is an opportunity because it gets people out of this discursive echo chamber where we're just repeating and repeating and repeating. And it's almost like press release writing at a certain point. And the thing I think that will save journalism, my hope, and I think that this is also, to tie it to AI as well, is this will, if we can work together and if we can kind of understand this importance and our role, what we can do as journalists that AI can't do is pick up the phone, knock on a door, talk to people, put information together in a critical thinking way. And that is what we need to think of this as an opportunity to do that.
I just have a last question because... Stephanie? Okay, thank you very much.
No last question. We'll never know.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Désolée de presser un peu, mais parce qu'on a quelques minutes de retard et on a encore un beau programme. On va passer en français pour cette séquence. Clara Soren-Rosso, journaliste judiciaire, et Pascale Robert-Diart également. Bienvenue. Je vous en prie, asseyez-vous. Et bienvenue également à Vivian Dupont et Mathis Bautret qui vont présenter vos profils.
Parler proche du micro, et sinon c'est
parti. Bonjour, Clara Soren-Rosso. Vous êtes journaliste spécialisée dans la chronique judiciaire. Vous avez été formée ici à l'école journalisme de Sciences Po. Puis vous avez commencé votre parcours à La Voix du Nord avant de rejoindre Le Parisien. Vous avez finalement choisi de poursuivre comme indépendante. À l'automne 2024, on vous retrouve à Avignon, où vous couvrez le procès hors norme des viols de Mazan pour plusieurs médias, dont Mediapart et la BBC. Cette expérience, elle vous a mené à l'écriture d'un livre, L'audience est suspendue, publié le 15 octobre dernier aux éditions Marie Romaine. un ouvrage où vous proposez un autre regard sur ce procès et plus largement sur la façon dont les journalistes racontent la justice aujourd'hui.
Oui, tout à fait, merci.
Bonjour, Pascale Robert-Diart, vous êtes journaliste au Monde, en charge de la chronique judiciaire depuis 2002. Vous êtes diplômé de Sciences Po également et du CFJ. Vos comptes rendus de procès ont reçu en 2024 le prix SCAM Christophe de Ponfilly. Vous êtes aussi l'autrice de plusieurs livres, dont La déposition et La petite menteuse, qui a été finaliste du Goncourt des lycéens, et tous deux aux éditions L'Iconoclaste. Et vous avez enfin été co-scénariste de la série Tant qu'il ne retrouve pas le corps, qui est disponible sur Arte.
Merci beaucoup, merci à tous les deux. On parlait du livre de Clara, L'audience est suspendue. En fait, en le lisant, on comprend qu'on est dans un tout petit monde, un peu d'entre-soi. Vous côtoyez pendant des mois entre journalistes, témoins, accusés, avocats, et aussi tout le personnel du tribunal. Et vous racontez une scène où vous allez chercher un sandwich à la boulangerie lors du procès Mazan, et dans la file devant vous, vous reconnaissez un des accusés. En plus, il prend le même sandwich que vous. Et vous savez qui il est. Sans doute que lui, il sait aussi qui vous êtes.
Oui.
Et en revanche, la boulangère, non. Et là, vous vous posez plein de questions. Est-ce que vous devez l'informer? Est-ce qu'il a droit d'avoir un petit temps pour récupérer son sandwich? Comment ça se passe dans votre tête à ce moment-là?
Oui, justement, c'est ces moments de vie qu'on partage avec tous les acteurs du procès qui m'ont semblé intéressant de raconter dans le livre. Alors évidemment, la boulangerie, c'est un peu le lieu, la boulangerie ou le supermarché ou la machine à café, c'est des lieux où on se retrouve tous, qui qu'on soit, on s'y retrouve à un moment donné. Et l'exemple que je donne à ce moment-là, c'est de dire, avec un accusé d'un procès aussi long, moi, journaliste, je partage quelque chose de presque intime. Je le connais par cœur, moi, cet accusé-là. Je sais quelles sont ses passions, je connais sa famille, je connais sa sœur, je connais sa mère, je sais quel âge il a, et je sais même quelles sont ses habitudes sexuelles. En fait, je connais beaucoup de choses à son sujet. Lui me connaît aussi parce qu'on se retrouve quand même tous les jours dans la même pièce depuis 2 mois et demi au moment où je le rencontre. Donc, dans une foule, ou en tout cas dans un groupe d'inconnus d'une dizaine de personnes, lui et moi, quelque part, on est presque proches, en fait, à ce moment-là. Donc, on se rencontre, on ne sait pas trop quoi faire, on est très déstabilisés tous les deux. Aucun d'entre nous n'est heureux de voir l'autre dans cette boulangerie, bien sûr. Mais on décide quand même de se saluer. Et effectivement, à ce moment-là, me vient l'idée de dire, les autres, là, dans cette pièce, ils savent pas qui est cet homme, ils savent pas que c'est un violeur. Moi, je le sais, mais les autres le savent pas. Et en fait, ils se marrent avec la boulangère, là, à ce moment-là. Elle est en train... J'ai presque l'impression qu'elle le trouve un peu charmant. C'est vrai que là, dans cette scène-là, c'est quelqu'un d'assez agréable. Ils rigolent tous les deux. Il faut que je la prévienne, il faut que je lui dise, peut-être aussi par... je sais pas, par mesquinerie un peu. Il y a un peu cette idée de jaser entre filles, de se raconter une histoire. Moi, j'ai du lourd à lui donner à ce moment-là à la boulangère quand même. C'est pas souvent qu'on a une anecdote comme ça à dire. Là, vous êtes en train de parler à un des violeurs de Mazan. Donc voilà, cette espèce de réflexe un peu mesquin et qui m'a fait honte quand je me suis rendu compte que j'allais y laisser cours. Finalement, évidemment, je ravale ma langue et je n'en fais rien. Mais on vit, quand on côtoie des accusés qui comparaissent libres dans Avignon, hors les murs du tribunal, beaucoup de moments comme ça où on a des réflexes plus ou moins bouleversants, moi, je trouve, d'un point de vue humain.
Mais là, éthiquement, Pascale, après tout, notre mission, c'est d'informer. Et finalement, si on ne l'écrit pas dans un papier, parce que cette boulangère n'a peut-être pas accès, est-ce qu'on devrait le faire à l'oral? Quelle serait la bonne posture?
Celle de Clara. Je trouve que c'est d'ailleurs magnifique d'avoir cette sincérité-là dans son livre, parce que c'est ça le livre de Clara, c'est vraiment de la sincérité. C'est-à-dire, elle est à la boulangerie. Je crois que cette expérience, on l'a tous vécue. Moi, je l'ai vécue effectivement à l'épicerie, avec un type dont je venais de voir la vidéo, dont je venais de le voir à poil. Je savais qu'il avait une poche parce qu'il avait un problème de cancer de la vessie. Bon. Et moi, j'achetais un taboulé et lui, il achetait, je sais pas quoi, une salade de carottes. Ça, c'était effectivement Mazan, mais le dire, bien sûr que non. Ce qui est intéressant, c'est la démarche, c'est l'envie de témoigner, alors que ce n'est pas notre boulot. Notre boulot, c'est de témoigner dans notre journal, dans nos livres, dans nos médias respectifs, et accessoirement, c'est de témoigner du procès. du procès, de ce qui se passe à l'intérieur de l'enceinte et non pas à l'extérieur, ce qui est quand même très important. C'est là que la décision de justice est prise, elle n'est pas prise dans la boulangerie.
Quand vous ressentez ce type d'émotion, de dilemme, de questionnement, Bruno Fonseca, il en a parlé là précédemment, il dit qu'un des bons réflexes à avoir, c'est de le partager avec son équipe éditoriale, ses lecteurs, etc. Mais souvent, vous dites que vous êtes seul un peu dans l'exercice. Comment vous gérez cette partie émotionnelle? Avec qui vous la partagez, si vous la partagez?
En fait, ensemble. C'est-à-dire que le petit monde, je voudrais juste corriger l'histoire du petit monde, parce que c'est quand même, si on prend l'exemple des viols de Mazan, c'est un petit monde qui, pendant 3 mois et demi, a quand même contenu à peu près, qui a contenu le monde, parce qu'il a contenu quand même une question absolument fondamentale. Donc nous, on était là-dedans, mais c'était le monde, pas le monde entier au sens, mais c'était un sujet majeur pour le monde qui se jouait là. Mais ce qui est vrai, c'est que je pense que le principe de rendre compte des procès, c'est évidemment d'être très très seul par rapport à la manière, comme dans n'importe quel exercice journalistique, hein, c'est nous-mêmes, c'est la sensibilité de chacun, c'est l'écriture de chacun, c'est le regard de chacun. Donc voilà. Mais il se passe dans ce métier-là quelque chose de très particulier, c'est que comme nous ne sommes pas en concurrence, nous avons tout en même temps. On est tous assis sur le même banc. Il n'y en a pas un qui a plus d'informations que l'autre. Et ça, c'est fondamental. Nous ne sommes pas en concurrence. La seule concurrence que nous avons, c'est du résultat. C'est le papier qu'on va faire ou le sujet qu'on va faire. Mais on est vraiment mis sur la même ligne. Et d'ailleurs, on est vraiment... on s'aide énormément. C'est très, très confraternel. Parce que quand vous prenez des notes... Vous ratez un passage, vous demandez à votre voisin, est-ce qu'il y avait évidemment un groupe WhatsApp, etc. Est-ce que j'ai bien entendu ça? Et voilà, donc c'est très confraternel. Et avec Clara, il se trouve qu'on a régulièrement, enfin pas régulièrement, mais plutôt à la fin, on a déjeuné toutes les deux parce qu'on avait besoin de parler. Oui, bien sûr, on avait besoin d'évacuer ce qu'on voyait.
À l'occasion de ce procès en particulier, étant donné le nombre d'accusés, certaines règles déontologiques ont pu être questionnées. Je prends l'exemple des noms qui ont fuité sur les réseaux sociaux de ces accusés, bien avant effectivement que le jugement soit connu. Et puis évidemment, leurs familles, leurs proches ont pu être impliqués et voir leur vie chavirer aussi par la divulgation de ces noms, notamment sur les réseaux sociaux. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez qu'il aurait fallu faire? Il aurait fallu ne pas les publier du tout en amont. Est-ce que c'est une règle qu'il faut remettre en question parce qu'elle est plus d'actualité?
Alors, c'est vraiment une question qui se pose, je crois, à chaque fois. Elle se pose pour les procès terreaux, elle se pose pour beaucoup, beaucoup de procès. Cette fois, elle a été, je dirais, troublée par le fait que, pour une fois, la bien-pensance était du côté de la volonté de publier les noms. C'est-à-dire qu'il y avait une pression considérable qui était « ce sont des violeurs, il faut publier les noms ». Bon. De la même manière que vous allez sur CNews et qu'on va dire ce sont des Arabes, ce sont des... etc. Et il faut publier les noms des agresseurs, etc. Alors qu'effectivement, comme tout le monde, quel que soit le crime qui lui est reproché, quelle que soit son origine, il a une sœur, une mère, une fille, un fils, des cousins, et qu'aujourd'hui vous avez le référencement Google et qui fait que quand le type va vouloir chercher un boulot, c'est tout bête. Hein. Ce qui a tout changé, c'est le référencement Google. Il va chercher un boulot, et ben on va taper son nom et on va le googliser et on va trouver sa mise en cause. Donc pour nous, la question de l'anonymat, elle est fondamentale. Ce qui est vraiment, moi, ce que j'ai trouvé très particulier dans ce procès-là, c'est que la pression pour publier les noms s'exerçait d'un côté qui était inattendu. C'est-à-dire que je pense que ce seraient les mêmes personnes qui auraient été absolument scandalisées qu'on publie certains noms dans d'autres procès et qui là l'exigeaient. Et Et ça, pour moi, c'était un vrai problème. C'est-à-dire que parce que c'était Mazan, parce que c'était le viol, parce que le viol est une cause nationale, parce que, à ce moment-là, tout d'un coup, il fallait publier tous les noms. Moi, au journal, on s'en est tenu à prénom et initiale du nom.
Oui. Ouais, non, pour compléter ce que tu disais, on a vu des conséquences assez directes de la publication des noms sur les réseaux sociaux et par certains titres de presse. Il n'y a en réalité pas vraiment de règles, chacun décide avec sa rédaction quoi faire. Les conséquences concrètes et directes, c'est principalement les enfants des accusés qui ont vécu des moments absolument atroces à l'école. Des enfants qui ont été harcelés, il y a finalement eu quelques tentatives de suicide parmi les enfants des accusés. Enfin, voilà, c'est évidemment des conséquences très terre-à-terre et qui arrivent très très vite en fait après.
Il y a un autre phénomène sur certains procès très très médiatisés, c'est que l'accusé peut avoir vraiment envie d'être dans la lumière et donc effectivement, je pense par exemple au procès Cédric Jubilard, qui est vraiment le comble de ce qu'on a vu peut-être ces derniers mois. Et puis, il y a aussi ce phénomène des témoins qui parlent à des médias avant les audiences. Et donc, ce qui fait que quand ils arrivent à la barre, ça peut apparaître un peu défraîchi. Comment vous analysez cette partie ?
Regardez un peu quelle a été la force de la parole de Gisèle Pellicot. Pourquoi cette parole a-t-elle été aussi forte ? Parce qu'elle ne s'est exprimée qu'à l'audience, que dans le procès, qu'elle ne s'était pas exprimée avant, qu'elle ne s'est pas exprimée après, et que maintenant elle va le faire dans un livre. Mais la force de cette parole, ça a été ça. Si vous comparez avec sa fille, dont la parole s'était répandue pendant l'instruction, dans tout un tas de médias, elle a écrit un premier livre, elle est venue à l'audience, elle a répété ce qu'elle avait déjà dit, elle l'a répété aux caméras dehors, elle en a écrit un deuxième livre. Et alors, moi qui ai suivi Jubilard, c'est une calamité, parce que la parole, tous les journalistes de radio le savent, ils ne vous font jamais répéter une interview avant de vous recevoir en plateau. Pourquoi ? Parce que la parole n'a de valeur que quand il lui reste une petite quelque chose d'authenticité, quand la spontanéité, l'émotion, je ne sais pas quoi, l'idée qui jaillit, le contexte, l'intelligence de l'intervieweur, la pugnacité de l'intervieweur va faire qu'il va vous faire sortir quelque chose que vous n'avez pas pensé à dire avant. Et donc ce laminage de la parole, cette parole qui devient, au procès Jubilard, c'était très très clair, tout le monde avait parlé avant, partout, dans des tas de documentaires, des accordés, des interviews, partout, etc. Leur parole n'avait plus aucune valeur parce qu'elle était devenue un récit. Un récit. C'était plus une parole, c'était un récit. Et ça, collectivement, évidemment, je veux dire, le procès Jubilard, c'est le problème des témoins, c'est le problème, mais c'est d'abord le problème de la presse, quand même, et du comportement des médias, qui ont même créé. Là, on est vraiment dans un système complètement tordu, c'est-à-dire que c'est l'interview de certains témoins dans les médias, y compris en mettant bien la poussière sur le tapis, sur le fait que c'était des gens qui étaient soit totalement des imposteurs, soit des incompétents, etc. Quand vous faites un bon petit montage, n'importe qui peut paraître avoir quelque chose à dire, et qui ensuite ont obligé la justice à les faire citer à la barre des témoins. C'est le système à l'envers.
Oui, et puis si je peux me permettre là-dessus, pour compléter, c'est un exercice de professionnel que de poser des questions dans le cadre d'une instruction et puis dans le cadre d'un procès. On le sait en tant que journaliste, quand on pose une question, on oriente la réponse. On y fait très très attention, mais ce n'est pas notre métier en revanche de poser des questions dans le cadre d'un procès. Il faut y faire très attention. Et donc nous, quand journalistes, on pose des questions à un témoin avant qu'il ait pu s'exprimer devant la justice, on oriente de toute façon son récit et il perd un petit peu déjà de sa spontanéité et on fait du mal à ce témoignage, à mon sens.
J'ai énormément de questions, mais je vais me concentrer sur la dernière pour vous laisser un peu de temps pour poser des questions à nos panélistes. Sur l'objet que vous pouvez ressentir, l'objet de pression. Est-ce que vous avez déjà été intimidé et par qui, dans quelles circonstances, à quel moment vous avez dû résister à des pressions lors de votre travail ?
Oui, moi ça m'est arrivé aussi parce que je suis au début de ma carrière et donc peut-être que je me laisse intimider peut-être un petit peu trop rapidement, c'est possible. Mais ça m'est arrivé assez récemment quand j'ai couvert le procès d'un ancien bâtonnier de Paris, un grand avocat parisien qui était jugé en correctionnel pour une affaire d'insulte. Il avait insulté une hôtesse de l'air. Donc j'ai couvert son procès. J'étais la seule journaliste à l'audience ce jour-là, et donc évidemment j'ai été assez vite repérée. Et donc pendant les suspensions d'audience, ce monsieur venait me voir en me disant que si j'avais envie d'avoir une carrière, il valait mieux que je m'arrête là. Évidemment, moi je voulais être chroniqueuse judiciaire, donc un grand avocat parisien que je connaissais par ailleurs, ça m'a fait peur. Je me suis dit effectivement il peut avoir un poids dans ma carrière. Donc je suis rentrée en rédaction, et c'est à ce moment-là que je crois que c'est très important d'avoir un rédacteur en chef, ou en tout cas une équipe autour, parce que j'en ai parlé. Et en fait, on m'a vraiment rassurée, et j'ai fini par sortir ce papier. Il ne s'est absolument rien passé, mais ça a été une nuit difficile à passer entre l'écriture de ce papier et puis la publication. Je crois qu'il faut tenir bon à ces moments-là et apprendre de ces moments-là. On voit qu'il ne se passe rien, en réalité, assez souvent, je crois.
Pascale, tu dirais quoi là-dessus sur les tentatives d'intimidation ?
Alors, je pense que moi, j'ai été protégée par mon journal. Je pense que j'ai été protégée par le titre, c'est-à-dire que c'est peut-être plus compliqué d'essayer de faire pression sur un journaliste du Monde que sur un journaliste, et a fortiori une jeune journaliste indépendante. Je trouve que cette histoire est absolument dingue. Moi, je dirais que la plus grosse pression, c'est quand même d'abord celle qu'on se met à soi-même, ne serait-ce que parce que ceux sur qui on écrit, on les retrouve le lendemain. Donc, si on est correct, si ça leur plaît pas, pour moi, le grand plaisir de la chronique judiciaire, c'est que personne ne peut nous interdire l'accès à une salle d'audience. C'est-à-dire qu'effectivement, quand vous faites de l'enquête, si votre papier déplaît à celui qui vous a informé ou à celui ou à celle qui vous a informé, vous êtes mal. Procès, je veux dire, si le papier déplaît au procureur, au président, aux avocats, ils ne peuvent pas vous empêcher l'accès au banc de la presse. Donc, on est quand même très, très, très protégé par rapport à d'autres journalistes. Franchement, on est surprotégé.
Je suis d'accord, mais je trouve par contre que la robe, enfin moi en tant que jeune journaliste, c'est effectivement on peut critiquer ces gens-là, des avocats, des magistrats, etc. Mais quand on vient en grande robe qui rend le personnage tout de suite très carré, vous dire qu'on n'est pas content de l'article que vous avez écrit et que peut-être votre carrière va en pâtir, c'est là que
mais cela dit, je pense que Clara a vraiment raison, parce que évidemment moi maintenant. Je pense que les gens hésiteront à essayer de faire pression sur moi, mais en fait, maintenant que j'y pense, si je remonte évidemment au début, bien sûr que j'en ai eu des coups de pression, voilà, mais je les ai oubliés.
Le cerveau fait bien son travail,
ouais.
Il passe,
mais
passe
c'est vrai.
sous
Non, mais
silence
rassurant.
les moments traumatiques.
Ouais.
Je vous propose, si vous avez des questions, on peut prendre 2 questions. Il vous suffit de lever la main.
Merci. Le thème de cette année, c'est les générationnels. Est-ce que justement le regard entre vous deux est identique ou différent finalement pour traiter les sujets de chronique judiciaire?
Mais ça, c'est la super question. Hein.
Ouais.
C'est la question. Parce qu'en fait, ça a occupé, je vous disais qu'on avait souvent discuté avec Clara, et ça a occupé évidemment nos déjeuners. On a surtout sur un sujet comme celui-ci. On est quand même sur la question du viol, la question du consentement. Bon, voilà. Ma génération et la génération de Clara n'ont évidemment pas la même expérience, pas la même culture. Moi, il y a des tas de choses qui me hérissaient. Je ne supportais pas la pression qui s'exerçait sur ce procès. J'avais beaucoup de mal avec les manifestantes dehors qui exigeaient 20 ans pour tous. J'avais l'impression que, si vous voulez, il y avait une vraie différence générationnelle. Bon, déjà, il y a une chose, c'est que ce procès, on était très, très, très nombreux à le couvrir, et il y avait 98%, peut-être pas, 95% de journalistes femmes. Bon, donc c'est une question. Et moi, je me sentais décalée par rapport à certains réflexes de mes consoeurs qui, par exemple, sur notre groupe, alors je vais vous donner un exemple très concret, mais sur notre groupe WhatsApp, on avait régulièrement des consoeurs qui nous informaient de la future manifestation de tel mouvement, sur voilà, l'opération qui allait se monter à tel endroit, etc. Ce que bon, d'abord, on ne fait pas d'habitude sur un tel groupe WhatsApp, mais avec surtout une dimension empathique. Et j'ai évidemment pas vécu le procès Patrick Henry où la foule hurlait à la mort contre Badinter. J'ai pas vécu les procès de la légitime défense. J'ai pas vécu des... Mais pour moi, dans ma culture professionnelle, je me disais qu'une pression est une pression, quel que soit le bord dont elle vient. Et que là, il y avait une pression qui était considérée comme légitime, qui était considérée comme tout à fait, qu'on devait nous-mêmes professionnellement, hein, on revient toujours à nous journalistes, qu'on devait soutenir et qu'on devait porter. Et c'était le cœur de notre discussion avec Clara, et on a eu d'ailleurs la bonne surprise de se retrouver sur plein de choses très très d'accord, parce que je crois que c'est pour ça qu'on... Enfin, moi, elle m'a fait vraiment énormément avancer, et on pouvait confronter nos points de vue, mais on pouvait en discuter, alors que j'avais l'impression que c'était compliqué, quoi, avec certaines consoeurs.
Oui, tout à fait. Pour compléter ce que tu disais, je crois que dans ma génération, en tout cas, dans cette génération-là, il y a aussi beaucoup cette culture des verres le soir, des déjeuners. On a une vraie sociabilité dans les procès qui est très, très sympa, mais dans un procès qui dure 3 mois, finalement, ça fait beaucoup de temps passer tous ensemble autour d'une bière, tout ça. Et on pourrait se dire que c'est lors de ces moments-là qu'on confronte justement nos différences, nos différentes approches, ce qui est en fait pas vraiment le cas. On en parlait avec Pascale, ces moments-là sont salutaires pour voilà, se détendre, mais aussi, moi, j'ai appris que, en tant que, je ne sais pas si je suis représentante de ma génération, mais en tout cas, moi, j'essaye de m'extraire de ces moments-là parfois pour être seule ou pour être plutôt à deux, parce qu'en fait, on s'est rendu compte qu'on finissait par avoir une couverture, tous plutôt la même, en fait, une couverture un peu lisse, on racontait tous la même chose, et finalement, ces moments-là, sans s'en rendre compte, fabriquaient un récit, on essayait tous, pour se rassurer, tous de se mettre d'accord sur ce qu'on allait raconter dans nos médias respectifs le lendemain, pour finalement essayer de polisser justement ces différentes approches. Ça nous faisait peur, en fait, peut-être, je ne sais pas, de les assumer jusqu'au bout. Et donc, ces moments-là de sociabilité qui sont très importants aussi, je crois qu'il faut les doser et essayer de ménager des temps plus interpersonnels, plus intimes pour pouvoir les confronter.
Il faut surtout assumer son regard, mais de manière intelligente, si vous voulez. Et encore une fois, le travail que Clara a fait après dans ce livre, c'est s'extraire de ça et réfléchir. Moi, ce que je trouve fantastique, parce que ça me paraît d'abord être la base du métier, tout bêtement, c'est avoir une exigence de mais qu'est-ce que je pense vraiment ? Est-ce que je pense parce qu'on me dit qu'il faut penser comme ça, parce que j'ai cet âge-là et que je dois penser comme ça ? Qu'est-ce que je pense vraiment ? Qu'est-ce que j'éprouve vraiment ? Voilà. Et cette quête-là, cette sincérité-là, c'est juste un petit bijou, quoi.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à toutes les deux. J'avais vraiment une toute petite dernière question, si vous pouvez répondre rapidement. Est-ce que vous êtes déjà trompés ?
Amazon ?
Non, dans le travail en règle générale, sur la couverture d'un procès, vous êtes trompé sur un témoin, vous êtes trompé sur un des personnages.
Sans doute. Oui, non. Je vais vous dire. L'intérêt d'un procès, c'est de changer d'avis.
Ouais.
Donc, par exemple, je vais vous citer le procès Jubilard. La mère de Jubilard, elle était partie civile. Depuis le début du procès, je la regardais, je la trouvais épouvantable, mais vraiment épouvantable. Elle était habillée, elle avait un costume bleu électrique, elle était hyper agitée, elle sortait, elle fumait, elle avait l'air elle faisait beaucoup de vent. Bon. Et donc j'avais une antipathie. Voilà, je dois dire que j'avais une antipathie absolue pour elle. Et quand elle est venue déposer à la barre, il s'est passé quelque chose. Enfin, moi, j'ai raconté ça comme ça. C'est une forme de transfiguration. C'est-à-dire que tout d'un coup, elle est à la barre et elle va parler de son fils. Et tout d'un coup, cette femme, on a vu l'épaisseur de cette femme, on a vu la souffrance de cette femme. Et j'ai été complètement sidérée. Voilà. Mais ça fait partie des bonheurs du métier.
Je vous conseille le papier de Pascale, en plus du livre de Clara, mais sur effectivement la mère de Cédric Jubilard, qui est... Moi, la lecture, aussi un moment un peu charnière, j'ai changé d'avis aussi, si tant est que mon avis avait de l'importance. Merci beaucoup à toutes les deux. Merci. Désormais, nous allons inviter Liz Kelly-Nelson à monter sur la scène. Et pour la présenter, Emma Carmichael. J'espère que je prononce bien.
There's the remote control.
Liz Kelly-Nelson, you are a leader in journalism innovation. You are dedicated to helping independent journalists and media creators build sustainable careers in a rapidly evolving media landscape. With a background in newsroom leadership, digital media strategy, and creator economy expertise, you have worked across the journalism ecosystem. You are supporting reporters, advising media startups, and collaborating with major institutions on the future of independent journalism. During your 2024 Salzburg Fellowship at Columbia School of Journalism, you founded Project C. Project C is focused on empowering journalists to embrace new models, to find sustainable revenues, and create impactful work outside of traditional media structures. You were also one of the Washington Post's first bloggers, and before Project C, you led some teams at Vox, USA Today, Gannett, and AOL. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me get a little bit closer to the mic, and I'm actually going to turn on a timer so I don't go over time, which tends to happen. So thank you all so much for being here today. I particularly love it when I get invited to speak to journalism students because many of you, those of you who intend to go into reporting and other types of newsroom work may never actually set foot in a newsroom because of the way that we're seeing the media landscape fracture. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the work that I've been doing, the state of what we call creator model journalism, and I'll give you some definitions to make sure that we're speaking in a way that feels like we are using the same definitions. And then some predictions and some things that I would ask you to think about as we head into the new year. So our story so far, I want to talk to you about why things are changing so much. And the industry is changing, and you've heard this from a lot of the speakers already here today in a big way. And this is really important for you as journalism students to hear because it does impact what you will do when you graduate with your degree. In the United States in particular, 75% of newsroom jobs have disappeared since the early 2000s. And over 3,500 newspapers, local newspapers primarily, have shut down. So we have a lot of bright-eyed journalism students in the United States too, who are all hoping to graduate and move into this work, and the opportunities are becoming fewer and fewer for them to do that work within newsrooms. So we are looking beyond. We've also heard from some of the other speakers this morning about the shift that we're seeing in both trust and the definition of what ethical journalism looks like, but also where audiences are going to get their news. So in the United States, the Gallup organization does a poll every year to trust or to measure how Americans feel about mass media. And in 2025, for the first time, it dropped below 30% to 28% of Americans who say that they trust traditional mass media. And this number started at like 74% when they started the measurement over 40 years ago. And a lot has contributed to that. Certainly what we heard from earlier with Julie and some of the other speakers, there has been a coordinated campaign to undermine the value of journalism and paint journalists in the United States and other places around the world as dishonest people who are doing something out of a motivation that is less than honorable, which isn't the truth, but it is certainly a perception that we're continuing to work and battle against. At the same time, technology has just changed the game immensely, especially for younger and younger audiences. We see the numbers in the latest Reuters report and in some of the work coming out of the Pew Research Group that more and more people are experiencing and getting their news on social media platforms than they are from traditional sources. So rather than navigating to a website, rather than getting a newspaper on their doorstep, rather than turning on the evening news and TV, they are like experiencing news in what we call time pass mode, right? Like when you're scrolling through your TikTok feeds, or it's coming to you in your inbox if you're getting newsletters. So things are really changing. And so we need to continue to think about, if our audience is going other places, how are we also there? So all of which is to say is that this has led to, around the world, but I mainly talk about the US in this presentation, a rise in what we call creator model journalism. And creator model journalism is, and there's a very specific definition that we use at Project C, an individual who combines elements of journalism with content creation techniques to produce news stories, et cetera, and unlike freelancers or others, they are doing it under their own brand or under their own flag rather than with a traditional news organization, again, on platforms like YouTube, on TikTok, in newsletters, and elsewhere. And so what makes a creator model journalist, and I'll show you another slide in a minute where I do want us to draw a distinction between a creator model journalist and what we would call a news influencer, which is a very different thing, also a really big part of where people are getting their news today. But at Project C, we primarily work with journalists who are moving into the space, leaving traditional newsrooms to get out there in the system. But what makes somebody a creator model journalist versus a news influencer is that they are, as we said, producing journalistic work, right? It has those earmarks, fact-checking, citing sources, showing your work, a clear corrections policy, an ethical policy, all of these things that we can look to and say that makes rigorous work. They're usually covering a niche topic, right? Like most people who, like if their primary platform is TikTok or a newsletter, they're not like the general news. They are not trying to get you information about everything. They are very often specializing in one thing. Project C, we have a community of 150 journalists that convene every day in Slack and help each other out and talk about it. And we have people who cover everything from government accountability to like pinball machines, right? So actually one of our journalists is here today. Anna, raise your hand. Anna Pujol-Mazzini, who's actually based here in Paris, who writes a newsletter called Good Story that you should all subscribe to. And that's her niche. They are perceived as a trusted messenger, right, by a loyal audience. So these are people who are actually making a connection. I said this already, but they work independently outside news organizations, and they do something that wasn't possible when I was a young journalist. I was a blogger at the Washington Post, and if I was doing that today, I probably, because I had a huge audience, would have thought, maybe I should go and like launch a newsletter on my own. 20 years ago, I couldn't do that because the creator economy didn't exist. It does now, and so there are clear ways that independent journalists can actually create revenue for themselves. I'm not going to go through this slide, but there is a QR code here if you want to look at it. This is a study that I did in early 2025 into the different sources and types of journalism that is reaching news consumers in the United States. And there are two categories there that draw the distinction, if you zoom in on it, between the content creator model journalist and news influencers. And I just put that there as an extra resource that you can take home with you. But I wanted to get to this slide. So the guy you see with the light bulb over his head is Ben Reininga, and Ben is great. He's now at Politico, but last year he was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard, and his work that he did there was he took every study that he could find about news avoidance from like the past 5 or so years, why people are turning away from news, and then every study that he could find about the rise of like creators as trusted messengers. And he threw all of those studies, and there were a lot of them, into a large language model. So here we go, AI, right? Like this is a use of AI that is actually pretty effective. And he asked the large language model to tell him, what are the top 5 reasons that consumers are turning away from traditional news? And what are the top 5 reasons that they are trusting creators as their news messengers? And what you see is there's almost like a one-to-one comparison with why consumers are turning away from traditional news sources in larger and larger numbers, and why they are gravitating towards creators and kind of what we call personality-led journalism. One of the things that I want to point out, based on what we've heard from this morning with others, is this perception of bias. And I think there's so much more to unpack. We could have an entire conference about kind of the ethics piece and what Julie and Margaret were talking about earlier. I would actually point out Margaret's newsletter, American Crisis, I believe. Yeah, every week you point out usually something that indicates for the mainstream press, which calls itself impartial in the United States, is not actually impartial. And the New York Times in particular, where Margaret used to work, there are editorial decisions that you see that are going into the content that is appearing in the news, that it's very clear to consumers that there is bias, even when mainstream news organizations are saying that they are not. And that has led to a huge degradation of trust in mainstream media. On the other hand, in this new territory that we are navigating with creator model journalism, you have creators, some of whom I'll show you examples of in a moment, who are very overt about how they feel about an issue. You know, Bruno, in his discussion, was talking about how to report, when you are faced with emotions or you feel that you have an affinity towards a particular group or you identify with them. What we hear when we talk to consumers about this, when we ask them questions about why do you trust somebody who it's clear has a very specific point of view, they say it's because at least they're honest about it, because at least they are telling us where they are coming from. So whether I agree with them or not, like, I'm going to go with them there. But all of these other reasons are also factoring into why we're seeing the rise. So just to give a few quick examples of who some creator model journalists are. This is Bassan Auda. Bassan reported and continues to report from Gaza and has been doing so since the war started in Gaza a few years ago. She was a documentary filmmaker prior to the war, and her primary platform is Instagram, where she reports. She actually linked up pretty early on in her work with AJ Plus, who amplify her work. And in the last year, they won several journalism awards for Bassan's reporting from Gaza, including a Murrow Award and a Peabody, which are pretty prestigious journalism awards in the US. This is Carlos Eduardo Espina. He was identified here by the New York Times as the one-man Telemundo on TikTok because he is serving the Latino community in the Houston, Texas area, and he has more followers on TikTok than any mainstream news outlet. And actually, if you do an eyeballs to eyeballs comparison, he has a larger audience, period, regardless of platform. This is Kirsten Hasse. Kirsten is actually a Swiss journalist who left Tagesanzeiger last year to launch a newsletter and podcast called Hasse mit Liebe. And she's actually one of the first creator model journalists in Switzerland and is starting to lead a concerted effort there to bring more independent journalism to Switzerland. And then finally, Dave Jorgensen in the US grew a massive audience for the Washington Post. He was called the Washington Post TikTok guy on TikTok, doing great work. He left in July, and with him took 85% of the Washington Post's YouTube audience. Which is a big indicator that what people are following these days are personalities, not news brands. And so I leave that with all of you to think about where you are going to reach the audiences that you want to reach with the reporting that you want to do. So that brings us to the question, what now? So I have 3 predictions hot off the presses for 2026 because it's that time of year. And whether these will come to pass, who knows? That's why they're called predictions and not facts yet. First is we are going to see this trend continue. It is actually pretty scaled in the United States, and we're starting to see it now in several other places. Here in France, you've got Hugo Decrypt, who is now, I would say, one of your most visible influencers, but I'd actually love to talk to some of you students after this. If you reach out to me and tell me who I should be following in France, like who should we be looking to. But we're going to see more journalists leave institutions either by choice or by layoff to continue building their personal brands. And traditional newsrooms will continue to partner or start partnering even more with these influencers in the way that AJ Plus has partnered with Bassan Auda to elevate the reporting. That's fine. And then finally, the atomic unit of journalism is going to become the individual, not the outlet. And I don't know if that's a change we'll see in 2026, but I think increasingly where we need to go is with the reputation and the intellectual property of journalists like Jessica, if Jessica ever leaves New York Magazine, that should go with her, right? Her reputation, and it will in many cases, but like I want journalism organizations to start thinking about the ownership that journalists should have over their work, because I think that will go a long way to actually keeping those journalists, some of them in newsrooms, because that's a big concern for newsrooms, is that if we have journalists who are elevating into these kind of personality-led talent roles, will they just leave like Dave Jorgensen left the Washington Post and take it with them? Possibly. So maybe what you need to do is make it more attractive for them to stay. We're going to continue to see platform consolidation around trust. So aggregators now, like Apple News, Yahoo News, Google, they're really looking for ways to figure out who are the credible journalists, right? How do we know that they are trustworthy? And there's so much work yet to be done, and I hope that it's work that Julie continues and that Margaret continues to define what trust and credibility in a trusted creator model journalist needs to do to actually earn that trust from the platforms, because the platforms can actually do a lot to put their finger on the scale to fight back against some of what we heard earlier about, like, you know, just like the most viral inflammatory thing being the thing that takes off. We need to continue to hold their feet to the fire to say there is responsible work out there and we need you to elevate it. Whether they will or not, I don't know, but we need to keep trying. You know, as we heard today already, AI is a big factor, and then that is now moving into the creator space where the AI companies are reaching out to creators to try to index their work and cut deals with them, and so we need to be very wary of that. And then a verification layer is going to develop for creators at a certain point, and that's a part of the infrastructure, one part of the infrastructure that we really need to see grow. And then finally, new revenue models will continue to emerge. The primary revenue models right now for creator model journalism are reader revenue, so subscription fees for newsletters, and then primarily in the video space, it's YouTube AdSense and sponsorship deals. We are going to continue to see different revenue models emerge that make it more and more possible for this work to be done. One of the biggest areas of growth that we've seen in 2025 and we will see again in 2026 is finally the philanthropic community is coming around and starting to realize that if what's important to them is the impact that journalism has, that they are not reaching a huge swath of the audience, especially younger audiences, if they're not supporting this work. So we're starting to see a lot of philanthropic funding go to individual creators, but we need to start seeing more of it go to building the infrastructure. We're going to see creators generating revenue from multiple sources simultaneously, and the middle class of creator journalists will become increasingly viable, not just the stars and then the people who are doing it as a side hustle. All right, so what can we do, right? Like, what can the people in this room, the people who need to hear this message, do to push this space forward? For creators, build in public, right? Establish trust signals from day one. We heard this a lot earlier from some of our speakers. Part of the trust that needs to be built is actually showing our work and how we do our work. So we see that a lot in creator journalism, and it's something that we need to lean more into, like, how did I report this story? Who did I talk to? BTS, behind the scenes content, is a big one for YouTubers, like showing how they actually reported something out. Think portably. If you're a creator, think about how your reputation travels with you, and then just do it. Don't wait for institutions to figure it out. If you are a reporter who thinks that there is a story or a niche topic that needs to be covered that isn't being covered, and you can't get a traditional organization to agree with you, but you really believe in it, try it out. See if there's an audience there and prove that there is one. For traditional media, stop seeing creators as competitors. This is a knee-jerk fear reaction that comes from disruption, and we need to get past that and actually embrace the creators and figure out how we work with them, not against them. And develop creator partnership frameworks now to ensure that you understand that there's a difference between an editorial partnership and a marketing partnership. A lot of news organizations default to thinking about creators and influencers as a marketing tool. That's not just it. Actually, Adriana, who you're going to hear from next, recently Adriana Lacy's website published a great piece about a TikToker and YouTube creator named Amber Sherman, who's partnered with MLK50, and it's a great model for what that kind of partnership can look like. And then finally, news organizations need to learn from creators. Don't assume that you hold all the power and that you have all the knowledge. There's so much that we need to learn from them, because guess what? They are like eating our lunch when it comes to reaching the audience, so we need to learn how they're doing that. For funders, you need to understand the creator ecosystem in your funding space. Open grants to indie creators, not just legacy news organizations or legacy news organizations that are partnering with creators, like actually support creator model journalists independently. And as I said a few minutes ago, fund infrastructure, not just independent creators, because a lot of these folks need things that they don't have when they work in a traditional news organization. They don't have liability insurance in many cases, which is a really scary thing. If, like Marissa Cabas, who writes The Handbasket in the US, you are going after the Trump administration every single day and doing that without liability insurance, it can be a really devastating thing. They don't have health insurance in many cases. They don't have editors to work with, and trust me, they want them. You know, that's something that we hear from a lot of kind of the journalism old guard is like, well, these people are working without editors. Well, guess what? It's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't afford it. So we need to continue to develop that ecosystem and that infrastructure. And then for you journalism students, for the aspiring journalists in the room, most importantly, don't wait until you have enough experience to start. You should be trying this right now, even if it's just for a small group of friends and family, that you launch a newsletter or a TikTok channel, a little bit of soft launch so that you can get your reps in and find your voice in this space and figure out if it feels right for you. Because also, it's okay if it's not. Not everyone is cut out to do this type of work. So launch a newsletter, a TikTok channel, a YouTube channel, a podcast, and publish consistently. That's really important. If you are telling an audience that you are going to be a go-to source for something, it can't be an every now and then kind of thing. It needs to be published consistently. And then treat it as a living portfolio that shows your thinking process, not just your finished work. And no matter what you choose to do in the future, whether it's going into a news organization or it is plotting an independent path, this will be a good investment in yourself. Increasingly, news organizations are looking for young journalists who are coming in who already have a following, who already have a ton of experience doing vertical video, all of these skills that are the currency of the future. So the best time for you to have started this was like last year or the year before, but the second best time is today. So, you know, leave here today and play with launching a TikTok. So the graphics that I shared earlier about where audiences are going were pretty dense, but take this away from them. The pivot is not happening right now. It's already happened. Audiences have moved on. Young people are not suddenly going to reach an age where they will subscribe to their local newspaper or start watching the evening news. It is just, we have moved into a different era. So it is really incumbent upon us as people who value and believe in journalism that we are a part of this distributed future, because the more that we can get young people like you who care about this work and care about ethics, care about standards, care about reporting on things that bring power to light, care about all those grifters that Jessica's writing about, like, you know, and by the way, the biggest grifter in chief is the one in our Oval Office right now. It's important that we make sure that reporting is reaching these audiences. So that is it for me. I would love it if you subscribe to the Project C newsletter. There's a QR code here for it. Myself and some other people who I work with, we write it usually at least once a week, if not twice a week, and it is for prospective or working creator model journalists, but also for the journalism industry. So we do a lot of research and interviews and other stuff that would be really helpful if you are interested. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. Adriana Lacy, it's now your turn, and for your profile, it will be Edith Wells Eastwood. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to announce Adriana Lacy, who is the CEO of Field 9 Group, a media and technology company driving innovation at the junction of consulting, analytics, and storytelling. welcome. Within Field 9 Group, you lead influencer journalism. This first of its kind agency helps news organizations to collaborate with creators to strengthen trust and engagement. You've been recognized on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and you've held roles in several newsrooms, including the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and Axios. You now teach media strategy to emerging journalists. Through your ventures and by teaching, you champion new models that bridge traditional media with today's digital communities. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and really just talk a little bit about where we're going next when it comes to measuring impact and success in journalism. I think this is a really interesting topic because for so long we've been focused so much on, what I like to call vanity metrics, things like page views and the number of newsletter subscribers that we have, but they haven't necessarily signaled trust in our audiences, and it's really shown that people are starting to go to other places to get news and information. So really just wanted to talk about some metrics that I think we should start looking at and just realize how important that is. So I want to just start with this question of sort of, have we been measuring the wrong sorts of metrics for the past, decade or two? Just to give you all some context, my entire journalism career has been in this audience engagement and social media space. My first job right outside of college, I worked at the New York Times. I was on the SEO team. So essentially what our job was is to make sure that when people are going on Google, they're searching for something, articles from the New York Times were on the top of the page. I was on the Instagram team there. At the time, we had 6 million followers, which I thought was huge. I took a look recently, I took a look this morning. The New York Times has almost 20 million followers now. So just seeing how much we've scaled, even just in the past 5 years or so, so much of it has really been just this idea of how can we grow. But I think what we're starting to realize a lot is that we've done so much to optimize things. Let's talk about page views, impressions, followers. We got really, really good at figuring out the perfect way to drive scale and to really grow our audiences. But I think what's really important to remember is that even though we've done this, we've really lost a lot of trust in our audiences. This stat that you're seeing right now on the screen is from the latest Reuters Institute report from the University of Oxford. And this is sort of looking at trust globally. So this is really taking all of the trust numbers from all of the countries that they measured. And what they found is that 40% of people trust news most of the time. This is not even half of people. Even though we're hitting, record numbers of reach and impressions and things, we're still losing trust. Even though the numbers might have looked great, we're starting to see that this relationship with our audience has really started to fall apart. And a big reason why I think that is because we're starting to see more and more that a lot of these impressions that we're looking at don't really equal trust. You can reach 1 million people who don't believe anything that you say. We see this all the time. We know that follower count doesn't equal loyalty. You could have 1 million followers, but you could only have a few 100,000 people engaging with you. We're starting to see that people might not even see your posts. How many of you follow your friends on Instagram and you haven't even seen their posts in weeks or in months? And we're seeing that page views are the same way. They're not necessarily equaling revenue sustainability at all. Anyone who's ran a business and had really high record numbers on Facebook or Instagram, that doesn't necessarily equal profit. And we all know that growing viral is definitely not the same as really growing an audience as well. So what we're starting to see more and more, and I think especially in the past few years, is that really building this audience is really just building a relationship. And I think that's why we're starting to see this kind of scale trap happen. We chased a lot of these platforms because this is what the platforms wanted. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, all of these platforms really, really want you to chase scale. There's so much optimization that has been done in newsrooms to really just do what the algorithm wants, figuring out ways to get more followers, to get more reactions from people, instead of really figuring out what are the best best ways that we can engage with our fellow humans. And I think that even though we've built so much of a massive reach sometimes, a lot of the engagement that we actually have had has been pretty shallow. And I think sometimes we wonder, why doesn't anyone want to pay for the news and the information that we're presenting? And a lot of times it's not that they don't want to pay or that our audiences aren't there. It's just that a lot of these audiences are going to new places. We see audiences subscribing to independent journalists in their own newsletters, like Liz was just talking about earlier. We're seeing people flock more to podcasts. We're seeing people flock more to even their own group chats for news and analysis sometimes. We're seeing that people are really just going places that feel less like a broadcast and more like a relationship. So a lot of these audiences and a lot of these creators do such a great job of building community with their audiences. They know their names. They like to talk to them. It isn't just that one-way communication that we see sometimes in journalism. And a lot of times we see these sorts of audiences really talking with their community instead of talking at their community, which is something we've seen in the journalism industry for a while. So really sort of looking at, what's next, I think what we're really going to start to see is this shift from really looking at reach and really figuring out how we get to relationship. So really kind of understanding the goal of journalism is not how many people can see your content or how many people see your articles or how many people just, see your Instagram post, but really kind of understanding how deeply are people actually engaging with the work that you're doing. And looking at it in that lens requires a very different way that we measure these things. So here's what I always like to say when newsrooms ask me, when I consult about, what are some metrics that we should look at in addition to things like page views and newsletters, which we've been doing for so long. And here are some examples that I think are really, really crucial for this. Engagement depth is one that I think about all the time. So not just looking at, did someone click an article, but really understanding, did they stay on the article? How much did they read? How much time did they spend on a page? What were their completion rates? Did they come back to the website? This is something I thought about a lot working in SEO at the New York Times because most newsrooms get a lot of traffic from Google and other search engines, and it's really great, but these readers often don't come back. They read one story, and they never interact with you again. So that's something we're always thinking about is how do we get these return visitors? How do we get people to come back? Something else I'm also thinking a lot about lately because we know that trust is so low is what these trust signals are. So are people sharing your work within their own communities? Do people like what you're producing so much that they're willing to send it to their friends in the group chat or send it to someone else? Do they like your work so much that they would go online to defend your work? What are ways that you're really seeing this is something I'm thinking about. And then looking at retention as well. All the time in journalism, we're so obsessed with new eyeballs. How many new users do we have? But something I think a lot of newsrooms forget is, are you keeping the ones that you have? What are you doing to foster the relationships of the person who's been subscribing to your newsletter for the past 5 years? Thinking about those retention numbers are also really, really important. And then finally, I think just direct relationships is something that's going to continue to be so important. Things like, creating memberships, creating that community, and really focusing on things that you actually own and not things that you're just renting from a platform. I always say when you're working on Instagram or Facebook, even though you have your audience there, you're still renting it from the tech platform. So really figuring out what does it look like to take your audience with you to other platforms. And I think so many creators have done a great job of that. They might have a really great presence on Instagram, but they also have a really robust newsletter or they have a really robust Patreon and their audience is willing to go with them to all of these different places to engage with them. And I think all of that to say is just really showing you that when you look and you start to measure your relationships instead of reach, I think your whole strategy starts to change. So instead of chasing algorithms so much, you're really focusing on how can we build habits? How can we make people want to be the thing that they engage with every single day? Instead of focusing on how we can engage just on the surface level, really starting to think about how we can go deeper and really figuring out what kind of journalism that we want to build in the future, which I think will be so much more personal, which is why we see creators really dominating this space right now because they really understand just how important that relationship is with your audience. And I think all of that to say, I'll just leave you with, the measurements and the metrics that we look at right now really do end up shaping a lot of the journalism that we make. If we keep measuring the wrong things, we're going to keep building the wrong things. I've seen so many newsroom build products because they wanted to get more followers or get more growth, but that didn't necessarily turn into a revenue opportunity all the time. So even though you might have the biggest reach, you might not have the deepest trust, and I think that's something that's really, really important to remember. So I'll leave you all with this. Really just think about how much you're measuring, because that really does determine the trust in your audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can stay here, and Liz, you can come back to the stage. And for the interview, we will have, sorry for that, Coralie Moreau and Idil Dilmaz will be with you.
Hello, thank you very much, both of you, for your keynotes. Let's just start right away by stating a simple fact that there's probably no journalist in this room today who doesn't really use social media or who doesn't talk about their daily life on Instagram, find future sources there as well. Can the audience still feel the difference between a journalist and an influencer online, and really should they be able to tell the difference?
Ooh, man, that's such a great question. I feel like I always hear a lot of criticism from journalists that say, the audience doesn't know the difference between news and opinion, and the audience doesn't know the difference between a journalist and a newsmaker or a creator. But I also think that's a problem that journalism started themselves. I think a lot about cable news, especially. You watch, a channel like CNN, you see all of these people on the screen and they're talking, and half of them are not journalists. They're commentators, they're analysts, and you would not really know that. It's not that explicit, even though they say it. People see someone on the news, they assume what they're saying is, journalistic in nature. So I think sometimes, it's becoming increasingly hard for people to really start to tell the difference. And I think it's really important that creators, especially who want to be in this space making news, that they're very clear about the transparency about how they get their sources and the reporting that they do, so that they can really show that they are doing this really good work.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I think that it isn't like a binary. It's not like a journalist over here, private person over here. It's more of a spectrum, right? And there are journalists who work on various points along that. Some who are more comfortable being all in and completely out there and kind of merging their private life with their work than others, and to some good effect and to some very scary effect. And there are others for whom it's really problematic. For a lot of women, it's actually problematic because people are really ugly to women online, especially female journalists who they tend to target in ways that they just don't target men. And for people like I was talking about earlier, like Marissa Kaba, she's actually not super active on a lot of platforms. She is active on Blue Sky, which is a little bit of a different vibe to it. But it becomes a safety issue, right, for her, and how you're out there. And even like video journalists, women journalists, one Joss Fong, who I worked with at Vox, and then have worked with her since now that she is in the creator space, has had a lot of issues with being propositioned and men reaching out to her. And, and so it becomes really a personal question, I think, of where you draw that line.
Yeah, that's really true. But for our second question, what are the ethical dilemmas for journalists personalizing their content online? Is there necessarily a trade-off, more audience, less ethics?
I don't know that there is a trade-off. I mean, so just if they are strictly sharing their work online, I think that what we are seeing is it is another means of delivery, right? It is a delivery system. And many journalists are increasingly worried about the fact that they're doing incredible work that with traditional media outlets is not necessarily reaching as big of an audience as it used to, right? And so where it is able to reach those audiences is on social platforms. So I think actually more journalists are comfortable with it than we're giving credit for, because journalists do want their work to be seen. You know, they want their work to have an impact. They want it to be read. And so that isn't an ethical question there. I think where it becomes an ethical question is what Adriana was talking about, when there isn't a clear line between what is reporting and what is commentary. And you know, one of the things that we need to think about as we build out frameworks for ethical creator model journalism is how can journalists who are working in that space actually develop signaling to say, this is fact, this is my opinion, that it's okay for both those things to coexist on my social feeds, but I need to clearly delineate when it's one or the other.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I love when journalists share a little bit more about their lives on social media. I'm a huge social media person. I've probably posted like 7 times on Instagram this morning. And it just kind of shows you, you know, I think that really helps with the relationship building, but I do, you know, agree it should be optional. Some journalists just, you know, like it better. But I have found when I've worked with newsrooms and even just getting them comfortable on social video, a lot of them, once they do it, they love it and they want to do more and more of it. So I think it's also just thinking about the tools as well.
Is there any way to project reliability and seriousness on social media as a journalist while remaining attractive for audiences on these platforms?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to go first. So yeah, protect from liability. I mean, I talked about that a little bit earlier, right? That liability is a big issue, I mean, for any journalist. And it doesn't differ whether it is, you know, publishing in a newspaper or for a news organization and on social media. If somebody takes exception to what you're writing about, whether it is a government official or a private citizen, you know, people like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, like they're going to go after you. And for independent creator journalists, they do not have the institutional backing, right, to actually protect themselves from that. And that's a big part of the infrastructure that needs to develop. But I don't think that it is fundamentally different at the end of the day. It's just, again, another delivery system.
Yeah, I think it just, you know, more and more requires you to be very smart about what you post online. I think about, you know, creators and even journalists in the States especially, where, you know, we live in a very litigious society where people love to sue people. And I always, you know, encourage journalists to really make sure that they're thinking critically about what they post. I like what was said earlier about, you know, if you would go out in the middle of the night and scream it in a public space, you know, would you still post it? Like, I think having those guidelines is really important.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Adriana, you already talked about this a bit in your keynote earlier about metrics and different types of metrics. I have more of a general question of, do we have it sort of all wrong collectively about those measurement of success of journalism through data about the size of our audience? Like, should we really be measuring the success of journalism that way, and if not, something else maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always talk about, you know, how newsrooms should be, you know, data informed, but not data driven. I think there's so much data out there. There's probably, you know, way more data today than there was even 5 or 10 years ago. So I think looking at the numbers, the hard numbers, are really, really important, because if you're posting something and no one is reading it, there's a problem, and there's ways that you can adjust. But something that I have been thinking a lot about and helping newsrooms figure out is, how do we measure impact? So how do we measure that this is actually changing things, whether that's changing legislation, whether that's making someone's life easier day to day? So for me, I think it's really just figuring out how to combine both of them in a way that works really well. A lot of newsrooms in the US are thinking more about how to create these impact metrics and report them alongside the numbers, so they can say something like, yes, this article did get, you know, 5,000 page views, but it also is the reason why there's a new law in our town. It's also the reason why someone has more access to food or resources. So I think thinking about both of them is really crucial.
Yeah, I would add to that, you know, like when I was coming up in digital newsrooms, like I was coming up in the age where we'd all have screens around the room that were telling us, like, it was almost like the Hunger Games for reporters, right? Like, who had more page views, and a lot of like success was defined by page views and unique visitors. And really the more valuable metric, and, you know, Adriana talked about this in her chat earlier, is the impact, but also the engagement. And I say that because if we are talking about the loss of audiences that are not engaging with traditional journalism, like where we see them engaging, it's really important to it's like a little tiny flame, right, that you want to foster into a big fire. And to me, that's a really valuable metric for us to say, if we see an audience that is suddenly responding to something, they're moved to comment on it or they're sharing it, we need to understand how to continue to develop that out. And in the creator ecosystem, the creator journalism ecosystem, that is a key way trust is actually being built with audiences. Like you will hear teenagers in the United States, and this is quoted in several studies, say that the way they figure out if a journalist is credible is they go into the comments, right, on a TikTok feed or on a YouTube feed and see what are other people saying about it. And so we need to be monitoring those spaces and be aware of it, but also be aware that we don't define what the success metrics are. The audience does. And if that's how they're defining it, we need to figure out how to actually get our arms around it.
Yeah. Very good point. So this is also for Liz, another question. As you said in your presentation, there is a decline in trust in institutional brands and an increase in trust in real people. Mm-hmm. So as young journalists, should we just ditch the idea of trying our luck in traditional media and just focus on social media?
No, not at all. Not at all. Again, that's going to be like a really personal decision for you. It may also just be a luck decision, like based on where your career takes you and where opportunities arise. But I would never say that, first of all, as somebody who for 30 years like came up in the traditional institutional journalism world. I like a lot of journalism students like have a love for that and the tradition and like the learning that happens. Like there is a really huge benefit to young journalists working in collaboration with journalists who have been doing this for a while. Right, the learning that's passed down, it's almost like an apprenticeship, a mentorship. So that is really important, and that is not something that has to go away as we embrace or expand our definition of journalism and what legitimate journalism is. Those partnerships can happen, but we just need to reimagine them and how we actually bring those different groups together.
Yeah, and I would also add, the number and different types of jobs in journalism have changed so much. When I graduated, I got a degree in, I think they called it print and digital journalism, and that's not even something, that they're really teaching anymore is print journalism in university, but we're seeing jobs now where someone is, a video producer, they're a creator host, they're a social host. These are jobs that didn't exist in journalism even 2 years ago. So I think, in addition to going down the creator route, there's so many jobs in journalism that you can start to do that didn't exist that might be more interesting for younger audiences as well.
Thank you. So maybe as a last question to wrap this up, talking more about AI, because we see audiences are basically increasingly splitting their time between, scrolling on social media and talking to an artificial intelligence. So do you think that AI will define the codes of journalism to sort of follow, to be able to attract audiences?
Ooh, great question. I'm a big fan of newsrooms adopting AI and journalism in general adopting AI. I think we've seen time and time again that the industry has been very slow to adopt things, whether it's the internet or so many different tools. And I think now's a great time to rewrite what it looks like to use these and create ethical guidelines and boundaries and things. So I think if anything, AI will complement a lot of this work. But I also think it speaks to how important that relationship with your audience is. In a world where everyone is looking at AI and there's deep fakes and it's hard to tell what's true or not, being able to see a person and engage with them is so valuable.
Yeah, and that's the point that I would underscore. Like, I think AI, yes, we need to certainly understand how to harness it, to use it in multiple ways to actually make reporting and news gathering and news dissemination more doable. But the human connection is going to be, I think, the kind of superpower of journalism versus AI, because humans at the end of the day are looking for a human connection with others and actually tend to build trust around, like, it isn't just even seeing a human, it's feeling that there's some sort of affinity or relationship that you have with that other human. Of course, maybe all bets are off when they start developing like AI personalities, personas who look like us and feel like us. That already happened. But I really, truly believe at the end of the day that human connection is a big part of why audiences build trust with journalists.
That's fair. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
very much for your time.
Thank you to you. Allez, avant la pause déjeuner, on repasse en français pour notre dernier panel sur les joies et les peines du management. Claude Guibal, Grégoire Bizot, Sarah Taleb, vous pouvez monter sur scène. Et pour vous présenter, Gabriel Garouste et Axel Le Pape.
On va commencer par Claude Guibal. Claude Guibal, vous êtes grand reporter à la rédaction internationale de Radio France depuis 2012. Vous avez couvert l'élection de Donald Trump en 2016, les élections en Russie, la Syrie et l'Ukraine depuis 2022. Mais votre carrière a surtout commencé au Moyen-Orient. Pendant 15 ans, vous avez été correspondante pour plusieurs médias francophones basés au Caire, en Égypte. C'est là-bas que vous êtes devenu spécialiste des mouvements djihadistes et que vous avez couvert notamment les printemps arabes. Après plusieurs arrestations du régime égyptien, vous avez été contrainte de rentrer en France. Et en 2020, Claude Guibal, vous avez reçu le prix Christophe de Ponfilly de la SCAM, la société qui gère les droits d'auteur des journalistes en France. Un prix qui récompense votre courage, votre sens moral et votre ténacité. On aurait pu également aussi ajouter votre amour du reportage, que vous définissez vous-même comme presque enfantin et viscéral. Bienvenue dans CNPDJ, Claude Guibal.
Quelle introduction, merci beaucoup. Merci de votre invitation.
Axel.
Merci. Grégoire Bizot, pour commencer, vous avez d'abord été journaliste à Libération pendant 18 ans. Vous êtes entré en 2001 au service économie en tant que reporter et vous êtes ensuite devenu chef adjoint, puis rédacteur en chef adjoint en charge des pages économie et terre. En 2010, vous redevenez rédacteur au service politique cette fois, accrédité à l'Élysée. Vous y suivez la campagne présidentielle de Nicolas Sarkozy en 2012, puis les premières années du mandat de François Hollande. En 2015, vous êtes nommé rédacteur en chef adjoint en charge du service France, puis rédacteur en chef chargé des enquêtes en 2018. En janvier 2019, vous quittez Libération pour devenir rédacteur en chef adjoint du M, le magazine du Monde, et depuis 2025, vous y êtes rédacteur en charge de la rubrique Justice. Et enfin, Sarah Taleb, merci de votre venue aujourd'hui. Vous êtes directrice de la rédaction du HuffPost France. Vous avez passé l'essentiel de votre carrière. Et auparavant, vous avez été rédactrice en chef du site de BFM TV.
Merci pour l'invitation.
Merci beaucoup. Tout est juste ?
Oui.
Alors aujourd'hui, on parle de la joie, mais aussi des peines quand on est responsable d'une équipe en rédaction. Parfois un peu de lassitude, mais on va commencer par l'aspect un peu positif, c'est la joie. Qu'est-ce que vous avez comme joie, Sarah, quand vous êtes dans ce poste de directrice de la rédaction du HuffPost ? C'est 30 personnes à peu près à manager.
Oui, alors c'est intéressant de commencer cette discussion par la joie, parce que pour être tout à fait honnête, en général, quand on parle de management, c'est pas exactement ça qui émerge. Mais heureusement, il y en a. Il faut savoir les reconnaître. Elles sont, je pense, elles cochent ce que sont nos missions quand on encadre, c'est-à-dire à la fois des joies humaines et éditoriales, et elles se mélangent. Et pour moi, elles ont différentes temporalités. Ça peut être des joies du quotidien, de se dire... on a pris le temps de se casser la tête pour trouver le bon titre pour notre papier, et en fait on a réussi collectivement à trouver la tournure qui reflète l'angle et ce qu'on a envie d'en dire. Donc ça, c'est une joie très quotidienne. C'est la joie de se dire à la fin de la journée, quand on regarde le site, est-ce que notre couverture elle est à la hauteur de nos exigences, de l'actu, elle reflète aussi la créativité de la rédac. Il y a des joies plus longues qui prennent du temps à prendre forme, mais sur les projets au long cours, et notamment en direction, on a parfois des projets qui prennent plusieurs mois, donc c'est la satisfaction de voir des projets aboutir. Et puis il y a des joies humaines, de voir les gens évoluer dans leurs compétences, de voir des rédacteurs qui avaient peur de se lancer sur un sujet et qui l'ont fait, et qui l'ont très bien fait, et qui nous ont fait confiance pour les accompagner là-dedans. Et moi, il y a une joie particulière qui coche ça, et en général, je ne suis pas en lien direct avec les gens quand ça se passe. On peut reprocher beaucoup de choses à l'open space, mais on peut capter des conversations. Et moi, il y a un truc que j'adore et qui me met vraiment en joie, c'est quand un journaliste parle à voix haute en disant « Ah tiens, j'ai une idée, mais je ne suis pas sûr de comment le prendre », et qu'un collègue s'invite dans la conversation, et puis qu'il y en a d'autres qui passent, et qu'en fait, il y a vraiment cette émulation collective qui va aboutir à un sujet, et d'être la petite souris qui capte cette conversation, ça fait partie, en tout cas à titre personnel, de mes joies. Donc ces joies, elles existent, mais comme je disais, il faut savoir les reconnaître. Ah oui, pardon, et une aussi qui est hyper importante, c'est il y a parfois dans les rédacs, et notamment dans des coups dus de l'actu, des moments un peu de grâce, on ne s'en rend pas compte sur l'instant, mais où, sans qu'on ait besoin forcément de se parler, tout se met en place, la mécanique, elle déroule, tout le monde sait ce qu'il a à faire dans ce moment, notamment les gros breaking news. Et ça, c'est aussi, c'est en ça que je dis qu'il faut savoir le reconnaître, parce que c'est tout le fruit d'un travail et individuel et collectif qui s'exprime à ce moment-là.
Grégoire, toi, tu as été chef et puis tu as quitté cette fonction. Pourquoi ?
Ça va me faire parler des peines, là.
Eh oui, on bascule sur les peines.
On bascule, là, même pas une petite joie, alors d'accord, alors les peines. Non, mais d'abord, il y a est-ce que c'est propre à l'organisation des entreprises qui produisent de l'information ? Je ne sais pas, mais c'est particulièrement vrai, je pense, pour ce type de formation. C'est que ce qu'on appelle la hiérarchie intermédiaire, c'est-à-dire tout ce qui est rédacteur en chef adjoint, chef de service, vous êtes ce qu'on appelle, vous êtes un amortisseur si vous aimez les métaphores automobiles, ou si vous aimez les métaphores anatomiques, vous êtes le disque entre les cervicales de votre colonne vertébrale. Vous avez le chef et vous avez la base. Et donc, la première fonction d'un chef dans une organisation de presse, c'est amortir les injonctions et les mécontentements en bas. Donc ça, c'est très... il peut avoir une petite tendance masochiste pour aimer ce genre de situation, mais forcément, ça fatigue. Hein, ça, et l'autre chose, c'est que... ça, c'est la principale peine, la difficulté du job. Et l'autre chose, il faut bien le reconnaître, c'est que le management est une science compliquée, qui mobilise. On sous-estime le management. On a l'impression qu'animer des équipes, s'occuper des frustrations, des ambitions, les rendre conciliantes, créer dans un service une émulation, une envie collective, etc., on pense que c'est assez simple, il suffit de dire on va faire ça, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez, oui, non. Et en fait, c'est énormément de temps, énormément d'énergie et probablement du talent, qui n'est pas forcément, et ça, comme on l'enseigne assez peu, et qu'on le découvre sur le tard, parce que le journaliste n'est pas un animal très collectif, hein, c'est un animal assez individualiste et qui, au cours de sa carrière, peut avoir tendance à être atteint d'une maladie très chronique dans notre métier, qui est la mélanite, et donc à devenir de plus en plus insupportable. Et dans un collectif, c'est de plus en plus compliqué à gérer. Donc ça, cette capacité à gérer, à faire c'est à la fois, ça peut être extrêmement enthousiasmant, parce que créer du collectif, c'est vraiment très chouette quand on mobilise une équipe derrière un sujet, quand on a vécu, comme moi j'ai eu la chance ou la malchance, enfin la chance journalistiquement de vivre les attentats, ça a été une mobilisation du journal, à l'époque j'étais à Libération, absolument extraordinaire. Et quand il y a une émulation, les gens en parlent encore comme un souvenir personnel et professionnel absolument très très fort, et qui restera très fort. Donc ça reste... Moi, j'ai rien écrit, mais j'ai encadré, et ça reste un souvenir extrêmement fort de ma carrière. Donc, ça peut être merveilleux, comme ça peut être vraiment un enfer, parce que c'est compte tenu de cette difficulté à manager.
Et c'est vrai que dans les rédactions, il y a la rare évolution qu'on propose à des journalistes qui sont devenus expérimentés, c'est souvent d'aller vers la chefferie, si je peux résumer. C'est rarement la mise en valeur d'une expertise, sauf sur le rang grand reporter senior, etc. Mais ça peut aussi avoir ses limites, et finalement, on peut se retrouver avec des gens qui veulent évoluer, qui se retrouvent chefs, et qui relisent des contenus en se disant finalement j'aurais été meilleur sur le terrain que la personne que je relis.
Ça, c'est très important, c'est qu'on a l'impression qu'un chef est un bon journaliste et qu'un bon journaliste devient un bon chef. Or, les deux notions n'ont absolument rien à voir. On peut être un excellent chef et être un piètre journaliste, pas avoir une plume très belle, etc. Mais être un bon chef, être un excellent journaliste et être un chef catastrophique, et là où tu as raison parfaitement, Alice, c'est qu'on a nos schémas managériaux classiques. C'est-à-dire, on prend un bon journaliste et on dit « Et maintenant, est-ce que tu veux être chef ?» Voilà, c'est là, parce que...
c'est une des rares évolutions.
Ouais, parce que l'évolution d'un bon journaliste, c'est d'être chef. Mais ouais, ça serait bien de... C'est pour ça que, notamment au Monde, ce qui est vraiment très sain au Monde, c'est qu'on est chef et on redescend, on fait des cycles comme ça, et on redescend journaliste de base, quoi. Et tout ça, c'est accepté, voire encouragé. On se dit, bon, on fait chef un peu, et puis, alors il y en a qui adorent ça et qui continuent, mais redescendre n'est pas ni une sanction, ni un échec, au contraire, voilà.
Toi, Claude, tu as refusé plusieurs fois d'être chef, surtout par amour du terrain. Mais finalement, c'est vrai que c'est une équation, on se dit ça devrait être conciliable de être responsable de ceux qui sont sur le terrain et en même temps d'aimer ça, non ?
Alors, moi, effectivement, j'ai refusé, mais j'ai été chef. En fait, mais j'ai été chef après avoir commencé ma vie professionnelle comme pigiste pendant 15 ans en Égypte, et je suis revenue en France. J'ai été embauchée par Radio France, donc déjà, je ne me sentais pas totalement légitime parce que je venais davantage de la presse écrite, à l'époque où je pigeais pour Libé quand Grégoire y était. Et donc, j'arrive dans une rédaction, et donc je n'ai jamais vu comment fonctionnait une rédaction, et 6 mois après, je deviens chef du service étranger. Et dans une rédaction où le service étranger était important, mais où moi, ma panique, c'était d'arrêter le terrain. Et donc, j'ai fait les deux. J'ai eu une double casquette à la fois de chef et d'encadrement. Je pensais que c'était possible, et je suis aujourd'hui totalement persuadée du contraire, en fait. Cette expérience de management a été catastrophique. Pendant très longtemps, j'ai dit que j'étais une grande brûlée du management. J'ai quitté mon poste, pas très loin du burn-out. Pour vous dire à quel point ça peut être rigide dans la tête en termes de carrière, c'est que j'étais dans le bureau du directeur de l'antenne et j'étais au bord des larmes, et il me dit « Mais pourquoi tu veux arrêter d'être chef ?» Je dis « Parce que je veux faire du terrain. » Non, mais directrice adjointe de la rédaction, tu veux ? Et là, j'étais en sidération, je me dis, il n'a rien compris. Parce que c'était incompréhensible qu'on puisse, en fait, dans l'esprit, c'était descendre. Donc moi, j'ai perdu ma prime, qui était de 200 € à l'époque. Et voilà, et j'ai toujours refusé depuis de reprendre du management. Pourquoi je refuse ? C'est qu'en fait, cette expérience-là, elle m'a obligée à me poser la question de qu'est-ce que c'était que le management, ou en tout cas, qu'est-ce qu'était un bon chef ? Pourquoi, moi, à un moment, je pouvais penser que j'avais des bons chefs et des mauvais chefs ? Et pourquoi, moi, ça ne s'était pas bien passé ? Je pense que d'abord, un chef, il doit se sentir légitime à l'endroit où il était, ce qui n'était pas mon cas. Moi, il me manquait des outils aussi de management, puisque je n'avais pas le planning des gens avec qui je travaillais, donc je n'avais pas cette légitimité-là par rapport à eux. Et enfin, un chef ne doit pas vouloir faire à la place des autres. C'est pour ça, tu parlais de la melonite. À un moment, quand on est chef, on est là pour voir pourquoi telle personne serait bonne pour faire ce reportage et faire confiance à la personne. Moi, les bons chefs, c'est ceux qui m'ont fait aller là où je pensais que je n'étais pas capable d'aller. Et ce n'était pas forcément des gens avec qui j'étais toujours d'accord, où on m'envoyait sur des trucs où je me disais, mais ça m'était dingue, ou alors ça ne m'intéresse pas, et où pourtant ils m'ont dit, si, mais en plus je suis sûre que tu vas bien faire. Et ça, un bon chef, c'est celui-là, c'est celui qui va être capable. Et moi, j'étais peut-être pas capable de le faire à l'époque, parce que je me sentais déjà pas légitime à l'endroit où j'étais. Et en fait, le management, c'est vrai que surtout chez les journalistes, c'est une science peut-être encore plus compliquée qu'ailleurs, parce que le journaliste, alors il y a la version, comme l'a dit Grégoire, et que je partage aussi, mais il faut voir aussi que par nature, on demande à un journaliste d'être critique, de porter la plume dans la plaie, d'avoir un regard, d'apporter une plus-value à quelque chose. Donc forcément, il va être chiant. Dans une rédac, le journaliste, il va être chiant parce qu'il va questionner. Donc pourquoi il va questionner, et c'est bon. Mais il doit avoir confiance dans la direction que va lui donner le chef, qui va dire, je pense que éditorialement, on va là-dessus parce que blablabla. Chef, ça veut dire expliquer, réexpliquer, convaincre et emmener avec emmener avec soi. Ça veut dire avoir confiance dans l'autonomie des gens, mais avoir confiance aussi dans savoir aussi que tout le monde ne se manage pas de la même façon, tout le monde n'est pas bon au même endroit. Il y a des gens à qui vous pouvez demander des choses, d'autres pas. Il va falloir gérer un collectif qui est quelque chose de très fragile, de très mouvant. Et pourtant, comme le dit Grégoire, quand on est dans la merde, quand il y a des attentats, quand il y a un énorme truc, quand vraiment... Là, il faut vraiment sortir les rames. Il y a cet état de grâce dans quasiment toutes les rédactions. C'est qu'à un moment, la machine merveilleuse du collectif se met en route. Et alors, nous, à Radio France, comme à France Info, par exemple, c'est une antenne toute info. Donc, on est en antenne 24/24. Quand il y a un gros truc, c'est hallucinant. On voit chacun, pouf, prendre sa place dans la machine. Et ça, je pense qu'en termes de... Tu disais, tu n'as pas produit ce jour-là, mais tu as encadré un énorme paquebot qui devient... ça devient magique dans ces moments-là. Le management, je pense que ça peut être magique de faire grandir des gens, etc. Mais je pense que ça ne doit pas être un exil et qu'il faut justement, ce que je trouve intéressant, c'est d'avoir appris en discutant avec Alice, en fait, à l'occasion de cette rencontre, qu'au Monde, on facilitait, ou en tout cas c'était un choix du journal, de permettre ces allers-retours sans que ce soit vu comme une fin en soi. Voilà, il y a des gens qui sont faits pour le management, d'autres pas, mais je pense que passer par le management a fait peut-être de moi une meilleure journaliste dans le sens où je comprends maintenant les questions de cet amortisseur. C'est vraiment très très bien vu, en fait, d'injonctions contraires que doit gérer un chef intermédiaire. Vous comprenez aussi des questions de budget, d'arbitrage, etc. Et puis, je pense que être reporter, peut-être dans une rédaction, peut amener à être un meilleur chef, dans le sens où on se sent parfois légitime de pouvoir mieux défendre la cause des siens, pouvoir dire, moi, quand ça m'arrive de faire des remplacements en chefferie, quand quelqu'un est sur le terrain et qu'on me dit « Ouais, non, mais attends, machin, là, qui est à Donetsk, il ne peut pas nous faire tel truc », et si je demande à machin s'il peut, et s'il me dit non, je suis très, très à l'aise pour dire non, c'est pas possible. Et si on me redit non, je dis non, c'est pas possible. Et parce que je sais que la personne sur le terrain, je sais ce qu'elle vit, et je sais que si elle me dit non, c'est que sincèrement, elle ne le peut pas. Et les chefs au-dessus, quand je dis non, savent aussi que je sais ce que c'est, et que si je dis non, c'est parce qu'effectivement, il n'y a pas moyen. On va trouver une autre solution, parce que le chef, c'est aussi cela. C'est celui qui va dire proposer une alternative. C'est pas se défausser, c'est être celui qui va être capable d'agilité. Voilà.
Il y a un autre point qui est difficile à appréhender, c'est quand on est chef d'équipe, comment on fait en sorte d'éviter l'écueil qui est les jeunes et les vieux. Parce qu'il y a quand même des générations qui se succèdent, il y a des méthodes qui peuvent être un tout petit peu différentes et des attentes qui peuvent être un peu différentes. Comment on évite, Sarah, vous avez 2 classes d'âge dans votre rédaction, vous me disiez.
Alors les vieux, donc c'est moi.
Les vieux,
37 ans.
c'est 35,
voilà.
Hein, c'est pas non plus très vieux.
C'est assez intéressant de voir effectivement ce que je disais à Alice, c'est que dans
Les vieux, c'est 35.
Non, dans la construction de la rédac, on a, disons, 25-30 ans et un autre groupe qui est plutôt autour de 35-40 ans. Mais qui... je ne vois pas forcément ce gap entre les jeunes et les vieux. Et à BFM TV, j'ai aussi pas vu ce gap-là. Est-ce que c'est propre au numérique? J'en sais rien. J'ai pas d'expérience dans d'autres types de médias. Mais ce qui est sûr, c'est qu'il peut y avoir des groupes de journalistes qui se forment. Il y a des choses qui sont naturelles et qu'il ne faut pas chercher à contrer. Enfin, je veux dire, voilà, il y a aussi des affinités humaines. On n'est pas là pour faire des groupes de potes. En revanche, c'est comment on amène... en fait, justement, dans la construction du collectif, tout le monde a un talent, tout le monde a une place, tout le monde n'est pas bon au même endroit. Et moi, je considère que mon rôle de manager, c'est de bien connaître mes équipes, de voir leurs points forts, leurs marges de progression et de les faire se rencontrer. Parce que, y compris dans des rédacs qui ne sont pas extrêmement grandes, et j'ai vu 2 catégories, parce que donc, le F, on est une trentaine, BFM TV, rien que la partie numérique, on était 150. En fait, les gens travaillent ensemble, mais ne connaissent pas forcément le travail de leurs collègues. Et ça, c'est un vrai sujet de comment on crée ce collectif. C'est de faire comprendre que la temporalité du service politique, c'est pas la même temporalité de traitement que les services lifestyle, que parfois il y a des choses qu'on ne peut pas anticiper quand les gens sont malades, et donc effectivement tel service va produire moins. Parce que des fois il peut y avoir aussi dans justement ces groupes ou les incompréhensions qui peuvent naître, des choses qui relèvent du manque de visibilité de l'ensemble. Et parfois, il y a des gens qui disent « Ah ouais, mais je ne comprends pas pourquoi on n'a pas fait ça tel jour ». Ou parfois, même les rédacteurs peuvent être plus durs que la chefferie sur pourquoi on n'a pas été au niveau des attentes. Mais en fait, juste parce qu'on doit faire avec un planning et que quand on est en période de grippe, de manière toute bête, on fait avec les effectifs qu'on a. Donc on a aussi cette adaptation-là. Et c'est comment on crée ce lien entre les gens dans la rédaction. Ça passe par... nous, on a un moment collectif tous les mercredis. On peut se réunir avec toute la rédac et on adresse différents sujets. Ça peut être des sujets d'ordre éditoriaux, mais aussi justement un peu de l'ordre de la vie de rédac. Et il y a le format un peu vie ma vie. Je t'explique comment ça se passe dans mon service, qu'est-ce qu'on a fait, pourquoi on a couvert de telle manière, qui est un partage de l'information au niveau des collectifs. Et ça se passe aussi de manière plus informelle, les pots, les moments de convivialité dans la rédac. Et aussi parfois par des projets éditoriaux sur une couverture éditoriale, comment on va faire travailler telle personne et telle personne qui, a priori, sont chacune dans leur couloir, mais en se rencontrant, vont découvrir qu'elles ont les mêmes affinités ou, à l'inverse, qu'elles ont des perceptions différentes. Et pour moi, ce qui est extrêmement important, parce que je pense que ce qui fait le sel de notre métier, c'est vraiment le débat, l'échange. On a un métier d'idées, on n'a pas les mêmes, et il faut qu'on arrive à les confronter. Enfin, c'est OK de ne pas partager le même point de vue. Il faut savoir se le dire correctement. Pour moi, c'est extrêmement important que juste les gens se parlent bien. On peut, et ça, parfois, c'est pas toujours évident de créer le débat, de créer le cadre du débat éditorial dans la bienveillance. Ce mot est un peu surutilisé, mais pourtant c'est important, parce que c'est ça qui va nous faire aboutir à la meilleure idée, c'est la confrontation des points de vue qui vont, à un moment, il faut arbitrer, et ça c'est le travail du chef, et j'allais dire du collectif de chefferie, parce que c'est aussi un collectif dans la rédaction et qui est trop peu envisagé dans les questions de management. En fait, on parle de le chef et son équipe, c'est vrai, mais il y a aussi le collectif de chefferie, et qui est aussi important, qu'il faut encadrer. Il y a manager les équipes, mais il y a aussi manager les managers, et ça, c'est leur donner les clés, les outils. Tu parlais d'un planning. En fait, si on n'a pas les bons outils pour encadrer, ça devient compliqué. Et c'est aussi de poser des situations de, en fait, je suis confronté à tel cas de figure, et en partageant l'expérience, ça permet aussi de travailler ensemble pour faire en sorte que la prochaine fois, ça se passe mieux, ou au contraire, qu'on reproduise des réussites.
Il y avait un très bon papier dans Le Monde Magazine, c'est pas du tout pour faire de la lèche, mais un petit peu quand même,
si, un peu.
Sur le management de l'intime. Il y a quelques années, nous, dans notre équipe, c'est devenu un sujet de blague entre nous. C'est-à-dire que finalement, quand on encadre, on sait beaucoup de choses, et parfois beaucoup trop de choses sur la vie personnelle de chacun. Alors il y a des choses vraiment liées à la santé, assez sérieuses, difficiles à appréhender, puis il y a des choses franchement qui sont facultatives, on n'est pas obligé de le savoir. Comment on fait pour trouver le bon équilibre pour ne pas être un manager de l'intime ?
Alors moi, est-ce que je peux répondre à cette question ? Par une anecdote assez marrante. Enfin, assez marrante. Donc, quand on est chef et qu'on fait travailler quelqu'un qui est un peu cossard, forcément, ça c'est classique, ça peut créer un peu de tension. Voilà. Mais moi, j'ai éprouvé une situation totalement inverse d'une journaliste qui était accréditée. Est-ce qu'elle était accréditée à l'Élysée ? Peut-être pas encore, mais en tout cas, à l'Assemblée nationale, je pense. Elle prend ses vacances, elle est jeune maman. Elle a deux jeunes enfants et un très jeune bébé. Et elle est au ski en février. Et je ne me rappelle plus très bien. L'actu, il y a une grosse actu à l'Assemblée nationale. Et elle m'appelle et elle me dit je fais le papier. Mais je lui dis non, tu fais pas le papier parce que d'abord tu es en vacances, c'est hors la loi. Et puis deuxièmement, il faut que tu te reposes, c'est très important. Voilà. Et elle a fini la conversation en pleurs, en raccrochant, parce que je lui interdisais de faire le papier parce qu'elle était en vacances. Et je savais, pour reprendre sur la question de l'intime, je connaissais intimement sa situation personnelle, familiale. Je sais qu'elle quitte le journal fatiguée et qu'elle a besoin de se ressourcer. Et malgré tout, il y en a qui sont complètement, pour le coup, totalement addicts. C'est normal, c'est un métier un peu obsessionnel, et donc quand on enlève son shoot d'actu, parfois on est en manque, y compris quand on est en vacances. Et là, il a fallu vraiment, se fâcher très fort pour lui dire non, tu arrêtes.
D'autres exemples sur le management de l'intime et quand même cet équilibre vie personnelle, vie professionnelle qui est difficile à appréhender parce que chaque cas est différent. Ceux qui veulent travailler 10 fois plus que d'autres, comment on fait pour essayer d'être équitable pour un même niveau de fonction et même niveau de rémunération? J'ai 4 heures.
Sur la question de l'intime, je pense qu'effectivement, il y a des frontières à respecter. En revanche, je pense que c'est illusoire de penser que la vie privée ne s'invite pas dans la vie professionnelle. Quand quelqu'un devient aidant parce que ses parents sont malades, ça a une incidence en fait sur son moral, sa motivation. Et notre rôle, ce n'est pas de solutionner sa condition d'aidant, mais de lui flécher les bons parcours au sein de l'entreprise, parce qu'il y a aussi des choses qui sont là faites pour les salariés, la médecine du travail, les assistants sociaux, etc. Mais je pense aussi que justement l'entreprise, et par le biais des managers, c'est prendre part aussi à certaines réflexions et à certaines choses qui bougent dans la société. Il y a une réflexion par exemple qui me traverse, et je pense la question de l'infertilité se pose beaucoup aujourd'hui. Devoir faire une PMA, ça a une incidence sur la vie de tous les jours, hein. Vraiment, c'est des rendez-vous, c'est des piqûres qui ont une incidence sur le moral, sur l'énergie, etc. En fait, considérer que ce n'est pas notre problème, en tout cas à titre personnel, je trouve ça pas possible. Et encore une fois, notre rôle n'est pas de rentrer dans la vie des gens pour solutionner le truc, mais c'est de se dire, ok, comment on fait pour, pendant un temps, adapter la charge de travail, se mettre d'accord sur des horaires, etc., pour que ce qu'on doit faire et les missions qu'on doit remplir, on le fasse, tout en faisant en sorte que la personne, juste, elle pète pas un câble. Parce qu'en fait, le travail peut abîmer aussi comme ça, quand il minore ce qu'on porte dans notre vie privée.
Oui, pardon. Vas-y, Grégoire.
Non, après, moi je ne l'ai pas expérimenté, mais au monde, tout le monde me l'a rapporté, donc je vous questionne là-dessus. Ils disent qu'avec cette nouvelle génération, avec les jeunes, avec vous, parce que nous on est vieux, c'est de plus en plus difficile de leur dire il y a un feu de forêt dans le sud-ouest, tout crame, il faut partir. Et que là, les nouvelles générations disent non, on ne va pas partir, parce qu'il y a la séance de ciné à 18h, parce que. Voilà. Et alors, ça, c'est un fait générationnel, dit-on. Moi, je ne l'ai pas mesuré, mais ça, pour le coup, c'est aussi un arbitrage très compliqué. La prise en compte de ma vie privée et la prise en compte de. C'est notre métier, quoi, de tout lâcher, de partir. Et c'est non seulement notre métier, c'est ce qu'on doit faire, et c'est aussi ce qu'on doit faire, ce qu'on a envie de faire. Ça doit être un registre. Normalement, partir sur des feux de forêt, c'est génial, quoi. Il devrait y avoir 5, 10, 15 personnes qui disent moi j'y vais, je fonce, je pars 4 jours. Et dit-on, mais ça je rapporte ce que.
À Sciences Po, c'est une fake news.
C'est une fake news ?
Dans notre école.
Alors, à Sciences Po, fake news, au monde, c'est pas une fake news, manifestement.
Non, mais c'est vrai, moi j'entends parfois la même chose. Alors, de mon expérience de management ou de mon expérience de manager aujourd'hui, moi, comme je travaille au service international, se posent aussi d'autres problématiques que celles qu'on a entendues par rapport à la séparation vie privée, l'équilibre de la vie personnelle et de la vie professionnelle. C'est que déjà, donc, nous, par nature, on travaille à l'étranger, donc on gère des amplitudes horaires colossales. Et quand vous m'entendez, par exemple, faire les matinales sur France Info, quand je suis aux États-Unis, il faut penser que j'ai pas dormi. Voilà, il m'est arrivé de travailler, quand je dis de travailler, c'est-à-dire de ne pas m'arrêter du tout, jusqu'à 30 heures. C'est un truc de dingue. J'ai l'impression que je vais crever après. Heureusement, je ne le fais pas très souvent. Mais voilà, on a des amplitudes horaires qui sont, nous, assez colossales. Et là-dessus, c'est important aussi quand il y a un chef qui vous dit stop. Là, stop. Nous, par exemple, quand il y a des élections aux États-Unis, c'est le chef qui va faire un espèce de planning de rotation et il va vous dire, OK, de 14 à 15, c'est toi qui dors 1 heure. Et de 15 à 16, donc toi tu reviens et puis le truc va dormir 1 heure. Voilà, ça peut être pendant avec les élections qu'on s'est tapées là, les 2 dernières fois et où ça peut durer des jours, c'est pas cool. Donc ça le respect du rythme, parce que nous quand on est sur le terrain, ça va, on va aller loin. Et y compris dans les prises de risque sur des terrains de guerre, on peut aller très très loin. Et là, le rôle de la chefferie, même si quand c'est vous le reporter et que vous avez envie de dire non, j'y vais, et qu'en face il y a un chef qui dit bah non, c'est pas toi qui signe le papier, non, là tu te reposes, tu as perdu ton père il y a 2 jours, ok, d'accord. Mais c'est vrai qu'on est dans des métiers passion où le travail est aussi notre exosquelette. C'est aussi ce qui nous aide parfois à tenir, à compenser peut-être un déséquilibre à un moment sur une partie de sa vie. Et c'est vrai que la chefferie doit s'inviter un peu dans l'intime, et on ne réagit pas tous de la même façon. Comme il est extrêmement difficile pour nous, par exemple, au service international, de mesurer la part des PTSD, aussi des syndromes post-traumatiques par rapport au reportage, parce qu'on les gère, ça se gère, le trauma, voilà. Mais que parfois, il y a des petites lignes, des petits signaux. Comment on fait pour dire à quelqu'un, non, mais là, vraiment, tu as un peu morflé, ou non, on peut pas. On peut pas. Donc c'est quelque chose c'est quelque chose qui nécessite une psychologie très importante de la part du manager. Je pense que manager des reporters, c'est pas facile. Et c'est pour ça que je disais que je suis peut-être un meilleur reporter aujourd'hui, c'est d'être passé par la case du management fait que j'ai un regard aujourd'hui différent sur le management. Je le vis pas nécessairement comme une punition, enfin comme quelque chose de coercitif et d'autoritaire. Alors, il y a des managers, j'ai eu des très mauvais managers, j'en ai eu aussi des très bons, et je pense que c'est possible de faire, mais voilà, il faut qu'il y ait cette confiance et ce respect l'un de l'autre, parce que je pense que c'est essentiellement ça qui fonctionne, c'est vraiment d'être fiable dans le travail de l'autre et sa capacité à travailler ensemble.
Alors, c'était un panel vraiment très anatomique, les disques des cervicales et l'exosquelette. Je vous remercie beaucoup tous les 3 d'être venus parler aujourd'hui au NPDJ. Voilà, il me reste à vraiment remercier les étudiants qui ont fait une couverture éditoriale que vous pouvez retrouver sur les réseaux sociaux assez exceptionnelle. Et c'est vrai que nous aussi, c'était un moment collectif très important cette journée. Donc merci beaucoup à vous toutes et vous tous, et merci à l'équipe qui, en régie, en salle et dans les coulisses, s'est vraiment activée depuis des mois pour faire en sorte que ça se passe. Merci.